Le analisi e le informazioni contenute in questo video non rappresentano raccomandazioni ad alcuna forma di investimento. Il trading è un'attività rischiosa, pertanto la responsabilità dell'utilizzo di queste informazioni rimane in capo ai titolari dei conti di trading o investimento. Ragazzi, neanche coi dati negativi si scende, qui anzi sui massimi si sale ulteriormente e addirittura abbiamo NVIDIA, vi farò vedere adesso prima che insomma ritorna in quarta posizione, lo faccio vedere subito, eccolo qui, dove sei, eccola. NVIDIA ha appena superato di 1 miliardo, come se fosse una cifra irrisoria, ha superato di 1 miliardo Saudi Aramco e sale sul podio delle società più capitalizzate al mondo. Ha superato il colosso del petrolio a livello globale, quotato ovviamente sui mercati sauditi. Nel frattempo Amazon staccata di 200 miliardi, Alphabet staccata di oltre 320 miliardi e insomma piano piano si avvicina ai due mostri Apple e Microsoft che sono sul mercato ormai da parecchio tempo, ma a quanto pare insomma basta poco da ottobre del 2022 moltiplicare la propria market cap di tranquillamente 8 volte non è più un problema, anzi no, scusate, 7 volte, 7 volte, 7 volte. Moltiplicare la propria market cap di 7 volte, ripeto, non è un problema, soprattutto a tassi alti. Poi miracoli economici che succedono solo in America. Nel frattempo abbiamo anche un altro record oggi, il record ovviamente del Nasdaq, record anche di S&P 500, nuovi massimi storici per loro, nuovi massimi storici anche per il DAX, nuovi massimi storici anche per il FTSE MIB, ma abbiamo una new entry nell'Olimpo delle market cap esagerate, ma più che altro dei rialzi esagerati, perché mentre Nvidia è giustificato, il rialzo di Nvidia è giustificato sostanzialmente dalla grandissima innovazione hardware dell'intelligenza artificiale, mi devono spiegare la grande innovazione invece che porta Meta, perché Meta è arrivata a 500 dollari ad azione e adesso ve la faccio vedere. Anzi 501,66 in questo momento, così tanto per renderci conto che innovazione invece ha portato Meta per giustificare un rialzo qui dai minimi di novembre 2022, un rialzo di circa il 480%. Sono, diciamo, ben accette teorie perché un titolo come Meta deve aver, insomma, quintuplicato il suo capitale in un anno e mezzo. Sono ben accette spiegazioni, eh? Sono ben accette spiegazioni. Ben accette, veramente. Comunque, questa è un po' la situazione sul mercato, quindi nuovi massimi storici. Saluto nel frattempo la chat dal vivo. Eccoci qui, saluto Marco Mascetti, un'altra settimana così forte al rialzo, ormai non so cosa stia succedendo sui mercati, questo è pazzesco secondo me, è pazzesco per tutti noi, fidati. Lorenzo dice buonasera, saluto anche Andrea Gatt, saluto Hermes77, Lorenzo dice l'oro spinge, anche questo no, ci dovrebbe far riflettere, finalmente l'oro che spinge su a 2083 in questo momento, mercati azionari che proseguono tranquillamente al loro rialzo senza tanti problemi. Saluto anche Fabio Maggioni. Simona Bonaiti dice buonasera, se mettete un grafico settimanale ventennale sembra che il FTSE MIB voglia andare a testare i 35.000 punti. Non so se ho lo storico disponibile a 20 anni, ti dico la verità. Hermes dice buonasera David, siamo tutti scioccati ormai, si può solo assecondare il trend con stop stretti. Sì, sicuramente. Attenzione perché poi se disgraziatamente si dovesse venire giù, poi i vuoti di liquidità ha voglia a mettere gli stop dopo. Orazio dice io non ho più parole. Comunque io a livello operativo in questo momento sto ancora short di Dow Jones. Sto ancora short di Dow, che era quello più debole, anche perché in questo momento il Dow fa 0,22, mentre Nasdaq e S&P fanno rispettivamente più 1,30 e S&P più 0,74. Oggi il DAX ci sta facendo la cortesia di non salire ulteriormente dopo aver fatto i massimi storici stamattina, perché fa meno 0,02 in questo momento a 17.740. Questa situazione, ricordando poi ovviamente il pattern sul FTSE MIB dei 4 mesi, dovrebbe portare a che cosa? Dovrebbe portare a una formazione di un nuovo massimo sui grafici mensili, dell'1,5, del 2%, esageriamo del 3% e poi da lì ritracciare, non crollare, ritracciare. Perché se parliamo di un mercato sano, di un mercato che effettivamente ci sono i fondamentali per reggere Nvidia, ci sono i fondamentali per reggere Meta, ci sono i fondamentali per reggere tutte le big tech, no? Se ci sono tutti questi fondamentali, dovrebbe essere normale vedere dei ritracciamenti, vedere delle finte, ossia un mercato che se ne va giù pesante per poi essere ricomprato piano piano nel corso del tempo. Qui non scende niente, si sale in modo verticale, non c'è una pausa, non c'è un respiro. Simona dice, by the way, 20° mese consecutivo di contrazione per il manifatturiero europeo. È una follia totale, ma io ti dico pure, non so se hai visto i dati che sono usciti oggi pomeriggio. Dati che sono usciti oggi pomeriggio, quelli del Michigan, una tabella rossa. Comunque saluto anche Fabio Feltrini. A proposito di dati, andiamo a vedere che dati sono usciti oggi, perché è interessante la situazione, no? Vediamo questi nuovi massimi in apertura del nuovo mese e andiamo a vedere un po'. Andiamo a vedere i bellissimi dati che sono usciti oggi. Stamattina abbiamo visto, insomma, i vari Purchasing Managers Index, appunto, che hanno riguardato l'Europa, alcuni positivi, altri negativi, ad esempio quello italiano negativo, quello svizzero negativo, positivo quello spagnolo, positivo quello europeo a 46,5, ma comunque sia stiamo parlando di un dato inferiore rispetto al dato di partenza che era 46,6, comunque ok. Buono anche il PMI della Grecia boom economico. Qui l'inflazione europea poco sopra le stime, 2,6 contro il 2,5 che era pronosticato, diciamo. Inflazione core 3,1 contro il 2,9 che era messo in conto. Interessante è stata questa. La rivisitazione in negativo dell'ultimo dato del tasso di disoccupazione, perché si partiva dal 6,4, ci si aspettavano le stime, appunto la disoccupazione al 6,4, è uscita al 6,4 e il problema è che quando è uscita al 6,4 questo tasso di disoccupazione stamattina alle 11, se ne sono usciti che hanno rivisitato il dato precedente, la disoccupazione fino alle 10,59 era in realtà al 6,5 e non al 6,4, quindi leggero aumento della disoccupazione in Europa. Ci stiamo imparando anche noi in Europa a modificare i dati, a rivederli in peggioramento solamente dopo che sono usciti. Comunque, andiamo avanti, inflazione in Italia ormai una barzelletta, 0,8, tra un po' andiamo direttamente in deflazione, facciamo più bella figura, e poi escono i PMI. Allora, il primo PMI è uscito alle 15,45, quello di S&P è uscito a 52,2, PMI manifatturiero, e già da qui diciamo, vabbè, adesso pure il settore manifatturiero va bene. Poi escono i dati di ISM, e i dati del Michigan, ok? PMI manifatturiero di ISM era previsto il rialzo da 49,1 a 49,5, è uscito a 47,8, quindi negativo. Bene, sempre dati ISM. Nuovi ordini settore manifatturiero erano previsti al rialzo da 52,5 a 52,6, uscito a 49,2. Peggio delle attese e peggio del dato precedente. Prezzi del manifatturiero, uscita a 52,5, peggio delle stime, peggio del dato precedente. L'occupazione, ragazzi, l'occupazione del settore manifatturiero era prevista al rialzo da 47,1 a 47,5, è uscita a 45,9, peggio delle aspettative e peggio del dato precedente. Spese per le costruzioni, dato mese su mese, erano previsto allo 0,2, quindi in calo rispetto al dato precedente, che in realtà era 0,9, rivisto un positivo a più 1,1. È uscito a meno 0,2, pure questo, dato negativo. Sentiment dei consumatori del Michigan era previsto al rialzo da 79 a 79,6, uscita a 76,9, peggio delle aspettative, peggio del dato precedente. Aspettative di inflazione a 5 anni, Università del Michigan, tutto secondo aspettative, confermano il dato precedente. Aspettative di inflazione, sempre l'Università del Michigan per quest'anno, prevista al 3%, uscita al 3%, prevista al rialzo rispetto al dato precedente, quindi tutto secondo le stime. Aspettative dei consumatori dell'Università del Michigan, prevista al rialzo da 77,1 a 78,4, uscita a 75,2, peggio delle aspettative, peggio del dato precedente. Condizioni correnti, Università del Michigan, previste leggero ribasso da 81,9 a 81,5, escono a 79,4, peggio delle aspettative, peggio del dato precedente. E dopo questo che cosa fanno i mercati? Indovinate un po'? Nuovi massimi storici, accelerano al rialzo e continuano ad andare al rialzo senza sosta. Vediamo ad esempio il Russell. Russell è praticamente partito, ragazzi. È partito il Russell. Questo è il grafico giornaliero del Russell. Stiamo andando a fare nuovi massimi annuali. Nuovi massimi annuali su Russell. Questo era gennaio, febbraio e questo è marzo. È partito direttamente col turbo. Ah no, scusate, è oro. Questo è oro. Russell, eccolo qua, scusate. 2070 perché c'hanno la quotazione simile. Ho confuso il Russell con l'oro. Comunque sta andando a fare nuovi massimi annuali. 2080-2079, l'ha pizzicati praticamente l'altro giorno. Ecco qua, no, l'altro giorno, ieri, li sta andando a pizzicare pure oggi, così, tanto per cambiare. E questo era il Russell che procede tranquillamente, sta facendo un più 1,09 tranquillamente. Nasdaq più 1,29, bellissimo. Il Nasdaq era partito come per dire, vabbè, proviamo ad andare giù. Stamattina ci ha provato, qua prima dell'apertura del cash, qua segnale negativo. Io personalmente ho pensato, bah, magari vanno a sentire i 18.090, 18.080, niente da fare, è salito direttamente da lì, non si è più fermato, si sta salendo ininterrottamente dalle 3 sul Nasdaq, non si stanno aggredendo i minimi, anzi close parte il movimento rialzista, close parte il movimento rialzista, close leggero ritracciamento, parte il movimento rialzista, close e adesso sta partendo un altro movimento rialzista. Anche qui il Nasdaq non si ferma più. Questo è il grafico a 4 ore, è praticamente partito un altro trend rialzista pure qua, non ci si ferma. Vediamo qua S&P 500, un grafico a 4 ore che insomma parla da sé. Vediamo il grafico orario. Grafico orario. Su S&P la situazione è nettamente peggiore, nel senso, stiamo salendo da mezzogiorno ininterrottamente. Si sale direttamente da mezzogiorno. Io qua ho pensato, cavolo, 4 ore consecutive di rialzo e stiamo ancora sotto ai massimi che abbiamo visto praticamente stanotte. Beh, andiamo bene. Niente da fare. Mercato che si va a prendere neanche i minimi. L'open delle 15. Quindi questo è quello che è successo alle 4 e poi alle 4 lui ha preso. È partito. Non si è più fermato. Neanche lui. Non si è fermato più. Neanche lui. Sale. Comprano massimi. Non si fermano più. Non si fermano più. Non c'è respiro. È come se ogni prezzo sia occasione. Ci sia l'occasione. Ci sia l'occasione. Va bene. Ipotizziamo questo. E allora uno va a vedere il Dow Jones. Vediamo il Dow. E questo è il Dow, un polmone totale. Allora, innanzitutto in apertura prova a scendere. Io stavo short qua. Prova a scendere. Prova a scendere. Non riesce. ho fatto, beh, cavolo, eppure quest'area qua è un'area che, insomma, sembra bella importante al ribasso. L'ha sentita praticamente, l'ha sentita anche ieri, l'ha sentita in overnight, l'ha sentita durante la sessione europea e adesso la stiamo ritestando di nuovo. Il problema la stiamo ritestando con una dinamica fortissima al rialzo. Sta faticando da morire a salire, a scendere neanche ve lo sto a dire, salgono tutti, proprio a scendere proprio per il momento è un'opzione che non viene proprio presa in considerazione, neanche quei dati che fanno schifo. Ma ecco qua la situazione sul Dow Jones, guardate come hanno ricomprato qua sotto fortissimi, hanno ricomprato fortissimi, ma non parte, non ce la sta, cioè, non ce la sta facendo, non ce la sta facendo. E allora penso, se questo parte, Nasdaq stasera 18,3, 18,350, pure di più. Andiamo a fare più 2, tranquillamente. Perché il Dow non ce la sta facendo a salire, ci sta provando in tutti i modi, sta al limite inferiore della zona rossa, ossia della zona di vendite. Niente da fare, niente da fare, niente da fare. Là dovrebbe partire un movimento ribasito, un ritracciamento, non un crollo, un ritracciamento. Niente da fare, si sale ancora, però con molta fatica, perlomeno questo è quello che vedo sul Dow, quello che vedo sul Dow Jones. Considerando l'enorme numero di candele consecutive al rialzo sui grafici orari, ci potrebbe stare un ritracciamento? Oh, se ritraccia Nasdaq, dovrebbe ritracciare pure il Dow. Scusate. Vado a leggere la chat dal vivo, poi ritorniamo su questi grafici abominevoli, direi. Abominevoli. Allora, Fabio Feltrini dice buonasera Davide e colleghi, dice GDP Now 2.1, ma intanto non gliene frega niente a questi. A questi non gliene frega niente, si sale, basta. E sta provando a risalire pure il Dow, nel frattempo. Sta provando ad allungare. Andrea infatti dice dati negativi o positivi, si sale, che professionisti sti mercati. Esattamente. Gianluca dice buonasera Davide, senti ho dovuto comprare un altro schermo altrimenti il Nasdaq non lo posso più seguire. Veramente. Oppure compra tipo una prolunga o qualcosa. Oppure mettilo in verticale. Metti in verticale lo schermo. Jacopo dice preparatevi al crollo del mercato che sto entrando long io per la prima volta. Tanti auguri Jacopo. Veramente tanti auguri. Mirko Filati dice Guten Abend a David e company. Buonasera anche a te. Marco Mascetti dice il Nasdaq è assurdo. Beh, direi tutti sono assurdi in questo. Pure il FTSE MIB è assurdo. Infatti Gianluca, ma avete detto subito, guardate che è il gold quello. Stavano tutti e due a 2070, 2080, ho pensato, porca miseria. Eh, che fail totale, totale ragazzi, è stato un fail totale questo. Perché sto cotto, sto cotto. Fabio Feltrini dice, segna la gobba del Brontosauro sul Nasdaq, ora la vado a prendere. Nicola dice, rieccoci, oro quasi 2087, ora non mi sbaglio con Russell. Sì, 2086, 40 in questo momento, più 2%, va proprio alla grande. Comprato i fazzoletti, eccoli qua, belli, nuovi di pacca. Nuovi di pacca. Fabio Fettini dice, se col 3% erano ottimisti per un taglio con il 2.1, credono al taglio dei tassi più di te. Allora dice, anzi, li ha toccati, ecco qua, 2086 e 12 in questo momento, oro. Allora, gobba del Brontosauro sul Nasdaq. Ah, eccola qua. Eh sì. Ecco qua il Brontosauro sul Nasdaq. Questo è un altro pattern. Eccolo qui. Allora, un attimo che lo vado a segnare. Perché questo è un pattern più complesso rispetto al Batman che abbiamo visto ieri. Insomma, ecco, questo diciamo è quello che dovrebbe essere la gobba del Brontosauro. E poi abbiamo proprio il brontosauro in sé. Eccolo qua. Eccolo qua. Come vedete, il target sarebbe la testa del brontosauro intorno ai 3,30 praticamente. Fabio, ovviamente, correggimi se noti qualche errore sul brontosauro, sia ben chiaro. Sì, assolutamente. Diciamo che è uno dei primi, proprio uno dei primi pattern, eh, diciamo, come si può dire? Direi non tanto primitivo quanto giurassico proprio. È molto antico, molto antico. Forse uno dei pattern più antichi che abbiamo, almeno per il momento. Penso viene battuto da qualche pattern che si chiamano i butterfly, roba del genere, perché sono ancora più antiche dei dinosauri. Insomma, questo qua è il pattern dei dinosauri. Accademia delle Arti, Docet, infatti, dice Fabio. Eh, Fabio dice, sei bravo a disegnare, Davide. Andrea dice, un professionista nel disegno. Fabio Geni, è Grisù, non so chi sia Grisù, ho sentito nominare, ora cerco Grisù. Grisù il draghetto, vediamo un po', immagini. Eh sì, più o meno stiamo lì, eh. Diciamo che il muso è molto simile. Il muso è molto simile. Dipende, in alcuni casi quando abbiamo invece delle estensioni di prezzo, il pattern è il Loch Ness. Pattern Loch Ness, qua ora non lo intravedo il pattern Loch Ness, ma sicuramente se me lo metto a cercare lo trovo, ecco. Questo però è il pattern Brontosauro. Poi dipende, se lo allunghiamo diventa pattern varano, così sembra più un varano, ecco, diciamo così. Poi all'occorrenza diventa un Brontosauro. Ok, sì, giustamente Giuseppe dice siamo alla follia al cubo. Esattamente. Beh, scusa, con questi mercati per forza. Cioè, ormai per forza. Nel frattempo devo vedere se il DAO mi va a punire. No, ancora sono vivo sul Dow Jones, ancora sono vivo. Comunque, parte tutto, gobba del brontosauro e questo guardate che fa, guardate l'orario, andiamo a vedere l'orario, è incredibile, ragazzi, è incredibile il Nasdaq. È incredibile, incredibile ragazzi, incredibile. Allora Roberto dice, ciao raga, ho le guance rosse dai ceffoni che il Nasdaq mi ha dato oggi. Non so come te la cavi nei tuoi conti personali, Davide, ma come disegnatore di brontosauri. Sei davvero il top, grazie mille Roberto. Grazie, grazie. Trade dice, aprire la live e trovare Denver. Top, buonasera a Davide e a tutti. Buonasera anche a Trade. Comunque, a parte gli scherzi, qui non c'è un segno di cedimento. Proprio il nulla cosmico, ragazzi. Veramente. Non c'è niente da fare. Non c'è veramente niente da fare. Andiamo a vedere qua, Nvidia, ripeto, 8,18 fa la prima candelina rossa qua. Mi sembra tanto che vuole andare a rompere i massimi che abbiamo visto praticamente post trimestrali, questi di venerdì 23 febbraio, dove il mercato è andato a prezzare Nvidia a 8,24, anche perché c'è Meta che fa nuovo massimo storico, 502. Il ribasso di Apple passa totalmente inosservato, anzi sta tentando addirittura il rimbalzo Apple in questo momento, 178,74, recupera un pochino, fa meno 1,12 in questo momento. Amazon prosegue tranquillo al rialzo, più 0,9%, senza tanti problemi. E quindi fondamentalmente il mercato si sta comportando come se tutto fosse normale, come se tutto non ci siano pericoli all'orizzonte. Effettivamente abbiamo visto, insomma, della serie a noi non ce ne frega niente. Ho pensato questo prima. Perché con questi dati da schifo gli Stati Uniti non mollano niente? Semplice motivo. Perché hanno un PIL che è stellare, al 3%, è alto il PIL. Un PIL al 3% con i tassi così alti è altissimo. Dicono, abbiamo la disoccupazione sui minimi. Abbiamo il PIL forte, economia resiliente. Possono inventarsi di tutto, ma noi intanto il PIL e il mercato del lavoro sono fortissimi. Punto, può uscire qualunque dato. Non gli interessa. Non gli interessa minimamente. Non gli interessa minimamente. Il dato è positivo, si sale. Il dato è negativo, si sale uguale. Si sale ugualmente. Corrado dice, non avevo visto il gold da stamattina, mamma mia, il 2,4. Il Nasdaq sta facendo il pattern giraffa, anzi serpente che si alza mentre Powell suona il piffero e ci prende in giro, esattamente. Ah, impressionante il Nasdaq, impressionante pure, impressionanti anche i movimenti dei titoli singoli, perché Meta 502, ragazzi, ma di che stiamo parlando? Più 2,4, ma è uscito qualcosa su Meta, deve essere uscita qualche notizia. Più 2, cioè sta sfogando un movimento incredibile. Cioè, guardate che roba. 501,97 Nvidia pure. Se uno la va a vedere su grafici, un quarto d'ora. Anzi che sembra sta facendo tipo resistenza a 8,20. Anzi che sembra che sta facendo resistenza a 8,20. Meta ai massimi li ha presi alle 7, nuovi massimi. Tesla pure si è ripreso più 1%. Google rimane qua tranquillamente. E questi qua, questi sono i titoli singoli. Fondamentalmente questa è la situazione. Il Dow rimane incagliato qua sotto 39.060. Prova a salire, se è dalle 5 che stanno provando a rompere tutto, fa minimi crescenti. Questo è uno, questo è un altro, questo è un altro ancora, questo è un altro ancora. Ci stanno provando a farlo salire, forse sfogherà, non lo so. Qui sul 2 ore un polmone totale, un polmone totale. Qui pure sul 3 ore sta cercando di salire, rimane sempre qua sotto, eccolo qua, sotto i 3900, ti è. Sotto i 3900, qua c'è una zona che non so, più comprata di questa, non so che altro debba esserci. Cioè, per me dovrebbe fare un movimento tipo questo. Qua pure bella zona comprata che ha provato in tutti i modi, no? E questa era prima della trimestrale di Nvidia, se non erro. Eccola qua. Una roba simile sta facendo. Russell si è fermato verso i 2080. Nasdaq prosegue. Nasdaq sta proseguendo, 2,90, 18,290. 18,290. Jacopo dice: Ma se scadono le call oggi, può venire giù di un po'? Non ne ho la più pallida idea, Jacopo. Fabio Fertini dice appena vira verso l'alto 8 ATR sul 15 minuti, vedi che succede. L'ATR come si chiama l'indicatore? Perché average true range io conosco. È l'average true range a 8 periodi. Su 15 minuti. Sì, vabbè, inguardabile sul 15 minuti il Nasdaq, eh? È una roba inguardabile. Sì, sempre che vira verso l'alto, perché forse c'è il VIX che sta tentando di riprendersi poco poco poco? O è una mia impressione? Forse è una mia impressione, vedo cose che non esistono. Come i draghi sul grafico del Nasdaq. Ma chissà che cosa si inventano. Io nel frattempo accendo Bloomberg.
Now for your updated COVID vaccine and your flu shot coming this fall.
Ancora che va, Nasdaq, eh? Il VIX sta in sala operatoria, davvero. VIX fermo, totalmente.
Well, I want folks to know who are at higher risk
Vediamo un po' il VIX.
of bad outcomes from these viruses to know they were top of mind when we were putting together this guidance. We all know someone
Anzi,
who
sta
is
riscendendo il
over 65 or
VIX.
immunocompromised. Like, they're in
Sta
my own
riscendendo il
family.
VIX.
And so
Ma
I was
penso.
thinking about them when we did this guidance. We wanted guidance that was simple and
Non
easy
male
for
comunque
folks to
questo
understand.
15 minuti di
People were
Nasdaq.
able to follow guidance that is simplified.
Carino.
And if more people are following that guidance, that means
Carino.
less viral spread and more protection for us
Io nel
all.
frattempo sto ancora dentro con questo maledetto Dow Jones, eh?
Those that are most vulnerable. Vaccine,
Tutto
again,
ciò
is
sto
the
dentro
most
ancora sul
important
Dow.
tool that we need to be using, making sure that folks are staying up to date with their vaccines. And then we released additional guidance for those who are over 65, for those who are immunocompromised, our disability community, pregnant moms and younger kids. They're all special considerations.
2,92 Nasdaq, eh? Ancora, che spinge, eh?
Keep those who are most vulnerable protected.
Throughout the pandemic, the CDC faced some criticism for mixed messaging around guidance. I wonder, is this effort to streamline...
Nel frattempo lascio qui sotto la configurazione che ci ha suggerito il buon Fabio.
Lessons through COVID. One of them is to have simple, clear communication. I think that's what you're seeing here. We're trying to help folks really prioritize what are the most important actions to take so that they can...
Lorenzo dice: David, ma posso mandare nel gruppo Telegram un link di una live che ci sarà martedì alle 18 dove c'è gente che dice che il mercato sale solo, così gli portiamo un po' di negatività e capirai. A parte se la portano da soli. Comunque sì, sono curioso di vedere che dicono, più che altro. Manda, metti il link, pubblicalo senza problemi. Pubblica. Voglio proprio sentire che dicono. Ma perché il mercato sale? Ma io l'ho sentito sull'internet che il mercato sale. Lo dicono... Lo dicono gli influencer di finanza. Lo dicono loro. Fantastico.
People just knowing their bodies knowing how to react to COVID now because we've all had it probably multiple times at this point.
Allora,
Therefore, it just is less likely to be deadly, and that's what this is, or is this
tu che hai
the virus
fonti
itself is
18,
just
scusate,
weak?
scusate, stavo leggendo in chat, ma qua il Nasdaq mi richiama all'ordine. 18,3 Nasdaq, eh? 18,3 Nasdaq, eh? Eccolo qua. La testa del brontosauro era a 3,30 più o meno, eh?
Without medication to return to work. That's until further notice. This is our new reality.
Io l'ho disegnata, la testa del brontosauro stava a 3,30, ragazzi, eh? Se arriva a 3,30 e scende, pattern brontosauro, ce ne abbiamo un altro, 18,302 ancora che va, e voglio vedere, scusate, i titoli singoli perché... Ah, prosegue Nvidia, 8,19. 8,19 più 3,57 Nvidia. Recupera pure un po' Apple. Amazon più 1. Senza. Sin problemas. Sin problemas.
Take all the measures before, but there are no hard and fast rules anymore about 5-day isolation.
Well,
305.
Someone who had tested positive for COVID-19, completely asymptomatic.
Sta andando,
no
sta
symptoms
andando.
to speak of. So this would
Nel frattempo il
essentially
Dow rimane
remove
bloccato lì, eh.
those people from needing to do anything
In tutto
at
ciò
all
il Dow,
if you
ecco,
never show symptoms.
ah.
And you're going to see people who don't like that guidance, who don't want to be sitting next to someone at work, particularly.
Pure su grafica un minuto non dovrebbe essere male l'ATR.
And there's no masking or anything that comes with that.
The masking guidance that comes out today.
Minimi di volatilità proprio di brutto.
And you are returning to the world, you should have a well-fitting mask.
Okay. Some things I guess don't change. You guys ever walk into a store or
Minimi
you're at an
pazzeschi.
attraction or something and they still have the mark
3,10, 3,11, eccolo, eh.
and you think, wow, what a blast from the past. It already looks like ancient history, and it just got a little
3,12 Nasdaq.
years, I guess.
It's a new era.
306.
It's worth noting it took us this long
That's right. Thanks for
to
bringing
get
that
here.
to us.
Riley Griffin, thank you so much. And great interview again with Mandy Cohen, the chair, director of the CDC. Now let's get an update on financial markets. As always, we go to Charlie Pellet with a check on that in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kayla Lines. We are pushing higher for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Not just higher right now, best
Allora.
of the day, and also a record on the S&P.
Ok, ma ci sarà solo martedì il link. Ah.
Up 0.7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up
Gianluca dice impossibile, non tiene nemmeno 2085, incredibile. Ora ho 2087.
185 points now, higher by
Stranamente anche molte shitcoin sono salite di brutto, ma perché? Oh, ragazzi, c'è liquidità a secchiate, sapevatelo, c'è liquidità a secchiate, ve lo dico io che c'è. C'è hype di rischio, c'è hype di rischio. Bitcoin e Nvidia sono e intelligenza artificiale sono i temi del momento. Quello è. Stanno raccogliendo retail di lungo. Stanno raccogliendo quelli. Sale Bitcoin, compro le shitcoin perché così almeno se sale Bitcoin le shitcoin vanno ancora più su.
They always figure that out in Washington. And
Staremo a
once they figured
vedere.
it out, they did postpone it so we can all have our weekend. Kaylee, the lawmakers can go home. I keep saying we got 2 weeks. I guess that's true. We really got 1 week because next Friday we have to start worrying about it all over again.
Allora, ero rimasta a Bruno, mi sono dimenticato di leggere quello che ha scritto Bruno. Tu che hai fonti più attendibili delle mie, puoi verificare quello che ho letto in chat sul fatto che Macron avrebbe dichiarato di aver inviato truppe in Ucraina? Porca miseria, ma veramente? Macron, Ukraine.
But this is the fourth time we've kicked the can down the road. Joe and I have spoken with many sitting lawmakers yesterday and in the days before who, when asked, is this the last continuing resolution we will see, have not given us a confident yes. Nobody seems to want to be taking that bet. And yet all the while, even knowing that we could be dealing with this come Friday, financial markets don't seem that
Allora, scusate, tolgo un attimo. Allora, gli alleati della NATO rifiutano l'idea di Emmanuel Macron di mandare le truppe in Ucraina. Quindi questa è la BBC. La BBC. Altre notizie di siti, diciamo, attendibili non ne ho trovate.
No concern to be found.
As usual, Kelly, I think you just got it exactly right. Wall Street, it just shrugs it off because we've just seen it too many times now. It's the boy crying wolf.
Meta 503.
And I must say, having
Continuo a leggere la chat. Allora, ero rimasto a Bruno. Gianluca dice: Oro cerca di tornare già stasera a 2100. Impazziti. Cristina dice: Ma l'hai disegnata bene sta testa del brontosauro? A prova di scuola d'arte proprio. È un pattern che ovviamente si scherza. Cioè, no, sottolineo perché sennò uno può pensare che disegno un brontosauro e lo utilizzo come pattern, perché no, non è così, è tanto per ridere, per rendere, diciamo, il tutto meno pesante, perché veramente è da mettersi le mani nei capelli qua con questo Nasdaq. Lorenzo dice: lo condivido martedì, va benissimo. Qualcuno mi sa spiegare quali sono i fondamentali per questi rialzi? È l'intelligenza artificiale, Orazio. Martedì mi voglio andare a vedere, sempre che non sto in live, mi voglio andare a vedere la live di questi qui. Ma chi sono, Lorenzo? Puoi scriverlo nella chat Telegram il profilo chi è, cioè che live è, di che tizi sono, solo per sapere il nome. Non vado guarda, non vado a infangare nessuno a dire niente. Me ne guardo bene, anche perché qua su YouTube sono tutti permalosi. Appena citi qualcuno va a denunce. Questo è quello che ho sentito in giro. Poi si comprano mele, pere, limone e arance a 4 soldi. Comunque 10 minuti devo andare, dice Lorenzo. Fintech Lovers dice: Davide, io mi chiedo, l'industria finanziaria istruisce e fidelizza gli investitori a suon di pack, dicendo loro che le discese sono da comprare. Come facciamo ad aspettarci un crollo se nessuno vende? Ma poi se si esauriscono i venditori, scusate, i compratori, si esauriranno quelli. Lorenzo dice: oro 2080, stranamente anche molte shitcoin. Ok, già lui dice: quantità di liquidità, bisogna vedere che colore ha questa liquidità, secchiate, esatto. Anche S&P rompe 5140 di future, pazzesco. Non lo sto seguendo, ora lo andiamo a vedere. Sto seguendo sotto suggerimento del buon Fabio questo ATR a 8 sul Nasdaq a 15 minuti. Ecco, ho capito, hanno scambiato le pool delle azioni del Nasdaq con quella di Bitcoin, dice Roberto. Politicimor dice Bruno verissimo, ha dichiarato così che ci sono già truppe occidentali in Ucraina. Lo hanno detto sul canale 5 e rete 4. Andiamo bene, ragazzi. Andiamo molto bene. Sì, Lorenzo, manda il link del canale dove faranno la live. Scusate un secondo, devo controllare.
They continue to want to participate in the economy, and that's spurred growth, ongoing growth, and that's kept inflation a little bit higher for longer.
Vediamo chi c'è in mezzo.
But I still think overall the news is good, and yes, we absolutely see the challenges that families face when they have to pay higher borrowing costs, but we also know that what they really want us to do is bring inflation down. There is no place I go. I have a very big district, 9 states, but you
Tra quelle persone che ho visto c'è una persona che invitai in una delle prime live, pensate, e insomma mi ha cancellato, mi ha bloccato, come se non so cosa avessi fatto veramente. Però vabbè, lasciamo stare. Jacopo dice: tutte ste candeline piccole. Comunque grazie Lorenzo. Jacopo dice: tutte ste candeline piccole da 15 minuti su S&P 500 non mi ispirano fiducia. Potrebbe venire un candelone giù. Jacopo, sei entrato long, sei entrato. Bruno dice: l'impennata dell'oro sarebbe più giustificata. Assolutamente sì. Assolutamente sì. L'impennata oddio, l'impennata così magari non so, però la salita di lungo sì, dai. Ci potrebbe stare come? Ci potrebbe stare. Nel frattempo, questo è sempre il grafico a 15 minuti di Nasdaq. Beh, una meraviglia, direi. Una meraviglia vera e propria. No, guarda. Lasciamo stare perché non mettere il gruppo Telegram perché sennò mi accusano di fare chissà che cosa qua. Qua me posso muovere. Me posso muovere qua, non si sa perché. Allora. Fabio Feltrini dice ci manca solo il crollo del dollaro. Fintech Lovers dice l'oro da solo non significa nulla. Il crollo del dollaro ce l'avremo secondo me quando la Bank of Japan interverrà per l'ennesima volta sul mercato. Allora lì è andata. Fintech Lovers dice va contestualizzato, si muove a seconda dei rendimenti del decennale americano. Roberto dice ho messo il time frame a 30 secondi e sono riuscito a vedere una candela rossa. Non so, e sono riuscito a vedere una candela rossa. Pure il 5 minuti è in forma, Nvidia 8,19 e 81. Quasi 8,20 Nvidia. Meta 503 e 36. Alla grande. Apple meno 0,89, Google meno 0,27, Amazon più 1%, secco. Nel frattempo io sul Dow sto ancora dentro. Una sorta di miracolo che sia ancora vivo. L'unico short ancora vivo sul mercato in questo momento si chiama David Pascucci. Allora, Nasdaq sta così piazzato proprio senza tanti problemi. Andiamo a vedere S&P. S&P pure stessa solfa, Stessa identica cosa S&P sta facendo. Sul 15 minuti sta salendo dalle 16,45 senza una pausa. Questo invece è il Dow.
Listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power, live on Bloomberg TV and radio from Washington, D.C., where the CEO of Boeing has spent a...
Lorenzo dice ho chiuso il petrolio perché devo andare. Ah, ma alla fine sei entrato sul petrolio. Beh sì. Andiamo Nasdaq. Time frame ancora più corto, il 3 minuti. Zero proprio. Un minuto.
Back in 2005, we're talking roughly 20 years, and now, Joe, apparently they might be looking to bring it back into the fold.
Well, I guess so. Yeah, this was part of Boeing. This was the division of the company that made the fuselage. Now it's a standalone company.
Se non erro, tra 6 minuti c'è la fine della pausa mensa.
To try to find out what in the world went on, even as he took responsibility, took the blame.
Vediamo che succede alle 8. Vediamo che succede tra 5 minuti fondamentalmente. Qui non si muove una foglia. Non si muove una foglia. 19,54.
Well, I mean, he was being encouraged to do whatever it took
Su 5
to
minuti
improve
stiamo
quality
facendo
at
altri
Boeing.
minimi
I'm not
sull'ATR.
sure that they were directly encouraging him to take Spirit back into the fold. But look, I think that Boeing took a cold hard look at what it would take to improve quality on
Questo è
builds
quello
for
sul
the
15 minuti.
737. And my guess is when they looked at Spirit, they
Delicatissimo,
thought
direi.
being on the outside and not having more control was going to make it really hard to keep quality up, especially at a time where they can't really afford any more quality problems. And I think that was, probably that was the ultimate decider that look, they had to get in there and take it over, or at least that's what's being reported. But that's the logic behind, I think, what's going on.
Yep.
So if this is about trying to make quality better, something that regulators have said they would like to see from Boeing, is this likely
Fabio
to run
Feltrini
into
dice:
any
hai fatto
regulatory
bene,
difficulty
spero
if
che
they
tu non
do
abbia subito
indeed
la
decide
mean
to pursue this
reverting.
purchase?
Una puntina di
We do have an
reazione.
administration that doesn't seem to like, any level of
Anch'io sono ancora
consolidation.
short su S&P, anche se con forti
Boeing,
dolori.
Boeing accounts for over 50%. I think the last number was roughly 60% of Spirit revenues. My guess
Toto
is
Nasdaq.
even more of their profitability because the high volume
Spike a
programs,
330
the
e
highest
poi
volume
viene giù.
program is going to be the Boeing 737.
Così.
And so I think that when
Spike
the
a 330 e poi
administration
viene
looks
giù.
at this, they'd say it's going to be for the better of American aerospace.
Così
They're gonna
arriva
say,
qua,
look, these two companies are already really well
ste parti a
intertwined.
330 e poi se ne
I think
viene
what
giù.
you're going to see as well is that
311,
if Boeing
312,
takes Spirit,
attenzione,
they're going to push
prosegue, qui
some of
Nasdaq,
Spirit's
315,
businesses out of the company.
siamo a
Spirit
qualche
is much
minuto
more
dalla chiusura dell'orario.
Airbus, they do it on the A220, the A320, which is their big money maker, and the A350. I think Airbus isn't going to want that inside Boeing, and so I think you're also going to see that maybe some of the more competitive portions of the Spirit business are going to go outside the company, and that probably makes the administration feel better as well.
That's fascinating. I suspect anything in the name of safety here could push this deal through. George, does Spirit want to be bought?
I think that I don't think they're going to resist. I think is maybe the right way to put it.
Well, their lives could be made better. I wonder if that actually helps them manage quality on their end, if they see that as an improvement.
Oh, I do think it's going to make their life better, right? I think part of why we got here was because, in their quest prior to the MAX crashes and groundings right before the pandemic, there's a long story here.
Che meraviglia.
Part of their trying to build better profitability.
Nel frattempo c'è il Nikkei 40.252, così tanto per aggiungere carne al fuoco. Guardate che rialzo, nuovi massimi pure qua sul Nikkei. DAX è rimasto lì. Qui abbiamo questo bel Nasdaq a 45 minuti, eccolo qui. Però ritorno sul 15 perché Texano Docet. Allora, Lorenzo dice: adesso ci penso, martedì non ci sono perché ho un impegno in ospedale. Vabbè, dai, sarà per il prossimo martedì. Spero nulla di grave, mi raccomando. Milan Steci dice: S&P si muove come si muove Nvidia, pazzesco. Se viene giù Nvidia si tira giù tutto il mercato. Ma quando io sono ancora short su S&P e so dolori. Manlio lo Monaco dice: sono short su S&P e me lo tengo. La prossima settimana vediamo se continua a salire. Electro Thinking dice: però se con la I si può creare Gerry Scotti che canta e balla Shakira, è un boost enorme per l'economia. Esattamente, la penso esattamente allo stesso modo. Oppure Gerry Scotti che canta Eminem in italiano. Anche quello non è male.
I was like, Carol, I wonder how much revenue Spirit gets from Boeing. And Carol's like, just go to the supply chain function on the terminal.
Hermes dice: dai, impossibile che non lo riprende un movimento così verticale di oggi Nasdaq. Mario dice: fa paura. Andrea Gatt dice: ti consiglio l'indicatore Smart QQE Mod. Non lo conosco. Non lo conosco. Comunque ragazzi, sul 4 ore qua situazione super positiva. Quindi
Carol and Tim, have a great weekend. We'll be listening from Washington. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
Dow ha chiuso positivo l'orario. Dow ha chiuso positivo l'orario. Questo è il Dow, ragazzi.
Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Andiamo Nasdaq 3,22, eccola la spike che vi dicevo,
Bloomberg Originals, Carol Massar along with Tim Stenevec. And let's get to the setup at this hour on this Friday, March 1st.
Eccola.
The first trading day in March here. And we've got an equity rally, Tim, underway.
Yeah, we're off to the races, I think it's fair to say. The S&P 500 up 0.8%. The NASDAQ composite up more than 1.2%. The Dow up 1/4 point.
You know, bonds are also up and yields have backed off, which is why we are looking forward to getting into a conversation with Torsten Slok. The new Fed narrative.
Ecco i 3,30.
All of a sudden, folks are saying, well, wait a minute. Maybe we're actually not going to get any Fed rate cuts this year.
Toccato 3,24.
Well, that's what Apollo's Torsten Slok says. He says the Fed does not need to cut rates this year, so we'll dig into that with him.
Yeah, also shares of New York Community Bancorp plunging to their lowest in decades. This as it flags weakness when it comes to loan oversight. Also getting a new CEO. We're going to dive into what's going on with New York Community Bancorp.
Yeah, and that commercial real estate exposure, specifically when it comes to multifamily housing. Hey, and on the way out, just take some notes here. Anti-racist, unconscious bias, and a few other terms. The corporate speak about diversity is getting an update. We're going to break it down for you exactly what is going on.
3,24. Guarda. Oh, Brontosauro comanda. Ci arriva a 3,30, poi viene giù,
We've got the S&P 500 index up 40 right now, 5137. That is a gain now of about 0.8%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 98 points now, higher by about 0.3%, while NASDAQ is up 199 points, up now by 1.2%. 10-year 4.18% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.53%. Spot gold up $45 the ounce, surging 2.1% right now, 2,085 on spot gold, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.2%, 80.02 for a barrel of WTI, back above $80. Boeing, as we have been reporting, is in discussions to acquire Spirit Aerosystems Holdings, a move that would reclaim control of its struggling former aerostructures unit and the main supplier at the center of numerous quality issues affecting the 737 MAX jets. Spirit up 14.5%, Boeing now lower by 1%.
3,25.
Stocks higher, S&P up 41 right now, higher by 0.8%. Charlie Pelleton, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, so appreciate it. Charlie breaking down some of the top stories and the market trade. Let's talk a little bit more about it, because we do have U.S. bonds climbing, disappointing factory data, declining consumer sentiment, solidifying some of the bets that are out there on interest rate cuts, with traders also sifting through the latest remarks from a slew of Federal Reserve speakers. There's been a lot this week, Tim.
Yeah, in particular, U.S. two-year yields extending their slide after Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller said he would like the central bank to boost its share of short-term treasuries.
Yeah, and traders slightly boosted their bets on a Fed rate cut come June. All right, our next guest, though, says the Fed will not cut rates in 2024, joining a growing chorus of Fed watchers from former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers to Wall Street strategists over at Citigroup. So, to clients, it's all in a story that is among our most read. I think it's number 3 right now on the Bloomberg, but it's been atop the list for most of the day.
Te lo dirò mercoledì se non sarà niente di grave. Madonna, speriamo, mamma mia. Quindi Andrea dice: ti indica con le bande, sei in ipercomprato e ipervenduto, molto utile. Mario Calveri dice: non capisco come fanno le persone a non avere paura di un 30% in 3 mesi al rialzo, ma se dovesse fare anche solo un meno 10% c'è il panico. Ragazzi, i 3,30 ci siamo quasi, Nel frattempo io sul Dow a un passo dallo stop, poi ci manca solo che mi stoppa e va giù.
December the 13th, we have seen a significant rally in the stock market. We are basically all-time highs every day. We've seen significant tightening.
Andato a toccare, vediamo un po', 327.8 qui.
issuance of IG bonds. January was the biggest issuance in the history of January's going back in time. You also had high yield issuance has been strong, loan issuance has been strong, and finally I've also seen IPO activity has really started coming back, and M&A activity has also started coming back. So with this very substantial tailwind of easing in financial conditions, it is really not surprising that we should begin to see more tailwind to employment, more tailwind to consumer spending, because now the wealth effect is higher because of stock prices going up and credit spreads being tighter. All that should mean that we are delaying Fed cuts, and therefore we will probably have now a few more quarters of strong growth before we begin to see any meaningful slowdown.
Come parla
I want
questo?
to get to some of the slower points we are seeing in terms of the US economy, but having said that, first I want to
Così tanto per, vado a vedere al volo, Nvidia 8,21,60, più 3,87.
and its behavior and how we kind of get towards the end of maybe a cycle.
Well, that's a good question, Carol, but if I on my Bloomberg screen type ECFC go,
Su 15 minuti, ripeto, sul Nasdaq si sale dalle 16,45.
how expectations have evolved for growth in 2024. You have literally seen since the Fed pivot in the meeting on the 13th of December that growth expectations for the US economic outlook
Attenzione,
for
sta facendo una
2024
shadow.
have really gone up dramatically, and that's telling you that the consensus is beginning to come around to the view that maybe there is no near-term slowdown, and therefore the timeline really here is that if there is no near-term slowdown,
Ragazzi, la vedete anche voi questa shadow? Non ci credo, dai, è impossibile. Sta ritracciando addirittura. VIX in positivo.
So the short answer to your question is that I still think that with financial conditions being as easy, or in plain English,
18,350. Chi è che aveva detto che era questa la proiezione massima? Eh beh, il signor Roberto per caso? Vediamo un po'. Vado a controllare, ma credo. Teo, può darsi che già stasera vadano a coprire le call sul Nasdaq a 18,350 e poi in after hours si vendono anche la madre. Così ha detto Teo.
Prices paid, services, manufacturing, all that points to more inflation pressure still in the pipeline.
VIX è tornato in positivo in effetti. Così di botto, senza senso.
But I'm wondering what has to happen that changes your mind. What's the data point that could come out in the next few months that says, okay,
S&P pure uguale a Nasdaq, paro paro.
Well, I think that we do need a change in financial conditions. There's a very academic debate where people often say, oh, monetary policy, it takes 18 months before it begins to show up in the economy when the Fed starts raising or lowering rates. But think about that time frame. We have already, since the Fed meeting...
Stiamo col fiato sospeso qua, Ogni candela può essere buona.
And most importantly, IPO activity. Think about all the stories we have on our Bloomberg screen every day. IPO activity is coming back. M&A activity is coming back. Of course, this is going to have an immediate impact on hiring. It's going to have an immediate impact on the economy. So therefore, the transmission channel...
Fabio Maggioni dice cena pesante a Wall Street. E beh.
It is actually having a quite immediate effect. So I would say the answer to your question is, if we begin to see financial markets begin to slow down, then, and of course, if the stock market begins to come down from these all-time highs, then I do think that we should...
Un meglio pranzo pesante. Questa di Bloomberg cerca di interrompere questo qua, non ci riusciva.
The economy is not the financial market. So I get what you're saying about the enthusiasm in the markets and the marketplace, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is good in the economy. We talk about the rising level of credit debt.
Così ho messo Nvidia tanto per peggiorare la situazione. Tesla prova a scendere, pure Microsoft test resistenza, qua Google rimane meno 0,37. Apple prova a risalire invece, risale la china. Comunque è incredibile, non si può vedere sto mercato. È inguardabile, totalmente inguardabile. Una cosa brutta proprio.
and also on a default rate for high yield. But note, this is mainly hitting
Mordix che sale.
entities such as
Così.
highly levered and highly indebted households and
Così.
highly levered
Dix che
and
sale.
highly
Perché?
indebted firms.
Così.
But those are
Va
still
bene così.
a relatively small part of the overall macro picture. The big picture still remains that in IG, companies are still doing well. In prime, when it comes to FICO scores for consumers, people are also still doing quite well. So with this tailwind from the stock market going up, from home prices now going up again, also likewise from credit spreads tightening, and remember also anyone who owns fixed income are
Un
getting
righello
higher
proprio
that's
qua.
also supported for consumer spending.
But
All those things on the scale still weigh more heavily.
Totally get it, Torsten, but isn't it fair to say that higher for longer is could potentially put the Fed at risk at overdoing it and create ultimately certainly tighter financial conditions out there, more stress on consumers that could ultimately play
Questo è il
out in a
VIX.
wrong way? Like, isn't there like kind of the tipping point where you get a little worried about the Fed staying too high for too long?
Absolutely, and that's why, again, if I type ECFC, go on my Bloomberg screen, look at the upper right-hand corner, it will show you the consensus expects a 45% probability that we will have a recession in the next 12 months. 45% likelihood of a recession in the next 12 months. Think about how serious that is from the consensus. It's exactly saying, Carol, to your points, that there is a lot of worry that ultimately all the effects, the lagged effects of the Fed raising rates are going to come and bite us. And
Questo qui è questo tizio. Ah, questo vede il 45% di rischio recessione in America.
We should see the stock market go higher. We should see credit spreads go tighter. If that's the case, that will continue to be a strong tailwind, both for people who own fixed income, but also for people who are in the stock market and seeing bigger wealth effects.
Torsten, are you ready to say that the next move from the Federal Reserve or the Fed could even raise rates at some point this year? Is that on your agenda?
I'm not. Yeah, that's a very fair question. I'm not quite ready to see that. I saw on Bloomberg that Larry Summers was saying that there was a meaningful chance that maybe
3,25, 3,26 ancora che prova,
just wait where they are. There's also something about doing that in an election year and doing that in a way that will send a really strong signal to financial markets. Why not just keep rates at these levels for a good deal longer and until the end of this year? And then once they begin to see that financial markets begin to settle down, inflation begins to settle down, and we do begin to see the economy slow, then they can begin to effectuate all the rate cuts that we now have been expecting literally since the beginning of last year, because as you know, of course, all too well, we went all in the market and the Fed and the consensus into last year saying, oh, we'll have a recession. That turned out to be wrong. This year, oh, they will cut 6 times, they will cut 7 times, and that also turned out to be wrong. So again, we shouldn't make the same mistake we've made now for 14, 15 months.
Right.
Let's just look at the data, and the data is pointing still towards that this economy.
So you're
is just
data
not
dependent
quite
like the
yet slowing
Fed,
down.
basically, right? Is that what you're saying?
My 10 charts in the note, Carol, shows you the data dependency exactly.
So what would change your mind to say that the Fed does actually have to increase rates? Not just hold them steady, but keep them...
Ragazzi, stiamo tutti col fiato sospeso. Siamo tutti in completo silenzio. Stiamo tutti aspettando che succeda qualcosa. Sì, tra un po' Nvidia capitalizza come Nvidia più Apple, veramente. Se somma a se stessa. Nvidia 8,20 o quasi 8,21 in questo momento. Vediamo che fanno su Nvidia. Se rimane là tranquillamente. Meta continua a salire nel frattempo. Questo è il paradiso del trend is your friend. Io bevo il prosecco e attendo il candelone rosso. È bravo col prosecchino. L'unica bevanda alcolica che mi piace da morire. Prosecchino.
How much of a risk is it that they find themselves at that point where they over tightened? You know, Mike reminding us, everybody reminding us that when recessions come on, they tend to come on really quickly. So how much do you think about that risk, and also, you know, that 2% target? How committed do you think the Fed is ultimately to that 2% target? Is it time to really rethink that?
Yeah, no, this is all really important. I do think that we have had a pivot party. Financial markets have been partying after the Fed pivot, but I don't think that this pivot party was initiated by the Fed. This was not the Fed's idea.
Deve prendere 3, ha toccato 3,29 e mezzo. Ha toccato 3,29 e mezzo il Nasdaq. Nel frattempo qua il Dow mi sta per prendere lo stop, tanto che aspetto.
Again, a pivot party where they said, but that's green light for risky assets, that's green light for the stock market to go up, that's green light for credit spreads to tighten. And that tailwind that has been created might actually have surprised the Fed, because this tailwind is now the reason why the Fed may
Quante candele sono consecutive?
As you hear from FOMC members in the last several weeks, they're now stepping back and saying, well, maybe we now have to wait a little while longer.
14. Vabbè, abbiamo fatte sul settimanale, figuriamoci su 15 minuti.
But that's what I'm saying. Maybe they'll have to push that further out if financial conditions to continue to be so easy.
Torsten, given what you're saying about what the Fed's going to do this year, do you think the equity markets and the rates markets are mispriced right now?
Well, I do think definitely that the Fed Fund futures, or SOFR futures as it's called now, of course, that they are pricing in too many cuts. I simply don't think we'll get these cuts because the economy is just simply not slowing down, period. And the other issue is, of course, that if it's not slowing down, then inflation is just not back at the 2% target. Several of the charts that
Questa è il mezz'ora.
they focus on that number of the leading indicators, both from manufacturing prices paid, services prices paid. Also, when it comes, and we saw that in ISM manufacturing prices paid this morning, continue to point to more upward pressure on inflation. Likewise, from the NFIB.
But we did see U.S. factory activity shrink at a faster pace in February. We did see that, which is concerns about some weakness in manufacturing.
Understood, but manufacturing is still only about 10% of the economy, so it's the service sector that still continues to do well, and there's a lot of discussion with is this just some statistical artifact here in January?
Superato i 3,30.
Statistics for inflation, but the problem with that is that then you
3,35 al momento.
also just some statistical fluke in employment, because non-farm payrolls at more than 300,000, that was a really strong number. It's also telling you that maybe there is some tailwind. So we'll see next Friday when we get the next non-farm payroll, how strong the tailwind is. But ECO go on Bloomberg tells me we still have a tailwind on job growth. That makes me worry about still growth is actually still quite strong.
Torsten, very quickly, 25 seconds. So what's key for you and Jay Powell next week? Very quickly, just briefly.
Well, I would definitely expect him to swing the pendulum back in the more hawkish direction. I think that they have been surprised at the FOMC, how markets have been, again, doing their pivot party and rallying on the top of actually a relatively modest change in Fed communication. So they would probably now say, well, Fed communication has to swing back in the more hawkish direction.
Questo è il VIX, ritorno sul Nasdaq.
Listen, so appreciate you spending some time with us. Apollo Global Manager, Chief Economist and Partner Torsten Slok. Do want to mention a headline crossing. President Biden announcing that the United States will begin airdropping humanitarian aid into Gaza, joining other nations in a bid to relieve increasingly dire conditions wrought by the Israel-Hamas war. So,
Simona dice il grafico a un minuto del Nasdaq è perfino ridicolo, assolutamente. Abbiamo visto prima con Righello. Trend is your friend. Dopo un'ora di immaterializzazione il Dow Jones dà degli strappi ora. Sì, ma sta ancora là, Si sta provando a salire qua sul mezz'ora. Tu scherzi, ma siamo fuori di 3 deviazioni standard sul 100, cioè sul Nasdaq. È dall'11 maggio che non trovo nulla di simile. Madonna. O dal 5 novembre. Stai a fare l'americano? Dior dice sempre short, arriva entro fine mese a 25.000. Hermes chiede a Fabio come lo misuri. La deviazione standard, ovviamente.
Regional sports networks. There's a lot of, it's a business that seems to be collapsing. Leagues have sort of toyed around with, should we do something ourselves? Some teams are doing like local TV and streaming. How do you see that shaking out?
So, I don't think I'm right on this, but this telling me this is what's going to happen. Because if you remember the WWE, they launched their own network that had their own content and had their own pay-per-views. And it was kind of a smart, bold, ahead of its time move. And then they pivoted at the perfect time and they sold their content to, what was it?
Peacock, yeah.
And that was really smart too, because they were able to leverage that number as high as possible. So they always zagged where the money was when the opportunity was. I think the opportunity for the NBA with the local teams would be to own all that themselves.
Nobody brings you top names like Bloomberg.
The point is that the economy is doing very well in the Netherlands, but the election was very much focusing on migration.
They had made 26 attacks. We'd given warning after warning, but we hadn't taken action.
Parliament has to
Rimetto il 15 minuti,
the debt break. The debt break is really a good ally.
Come il 5 minuti.
Addressing inequality, a key sort of driver of our policies.
Bloomberg. Context changes everything. In a multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's a lot of ground to cover.
We indeed have a rally.
We're talking a lot of dividends. We're talking income.
We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ.
Cioè, le cose sono due, ragazzi. Cioè, le cose sono due. O questo prosegue così, o se ne viene proprio giù. Se no prosegue così questo, Cioè non è che c'è tanto altro da fare. Questo prosegue così tranquillo.
Why should somebody want to be in the pharmaceutical industry? Why not go into something sexy like private equity?
In the end, what we do is we create these miracles that fit in the palm of your hand, these little medicines that can transform a human being's life.
Cioè deve succedere qualcosa di pesante tipo sui titoli singoli. Su Meta, su Nvidia, su Tesla, su Microsoft, su Apple sta recuperando addirittura. Meno 0,38. Guarda Apple come se la recupera. Amazon addirittura a 178,47 è arrivato.
41 points to 51.38. That is a gain right now of about 0.8%. The Dow up 105 now, higher by 0.3%. The Nasdaq Composite Index is surging 205 points. Another tech-fueled rally up 1.3%. Nasdaq at a record, bringing its year-to-date gain in this very young year to 8.5%.
Vabbè, credo che sia giunto il momento di mettere in atto il pattern Pascucci.
10-year 4.18% with a 2-year right now at 4.52%. Spot gold today up 2%, $2,085 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude.
Alex dice: hai già visto in passato un mercato simile a questo? Sì, ha voglia. Candele così su Nasdaq. Sì, qualche anno fa me lo ricordo perché presi una marea di stop. Presi un numero di stop infinito, Alex. Un numero di stop infinito. Sì, è successo più di una volta sta roba. È successo più di una volta. Non so se proveranno a buttarlo giù. Non lo so. Il rischio c'è della serie. Se scende, scende forte. Se scende, scende forte. Quindi sarebbe un peccato non assumersi il rischio su una posizione del genere. Però potrebbe pure tranquillamente proseguire così. Quello è il problema. Senza tanti problemi.
Yeah, the bank also has got a new CEO. Alessandro Danilo will become CEO effective immediately, succeeding Tom
Ragazzi,
Caniemi. The company expects to miss a deadline for filing an annual report as it shores up controls.
Yeah, and the KRE, because we like to kind of broaden out, see what the rest of the regionals are doing. The Spider S&P Regional Banking ETF also slightly lower today. It was down a little bit more than 1%. But we wanted to dig into this company and see contagion is once again a concern. So with more New York Community Bank Corp and the group and its exposure to commercial real estate, we are grateful to have with us once again our Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Analyst for U.S. Regional Banks, Herman Chan, here in studio.
Ragazzi, mi assento per una piccola pausa e poi andiamo avanti. Nel frattempo sfruttate il pattern Pascucci, per chi lo conosce già sa cosa deve fare.
It has a lot on its to-do list, right? So before yesterday's announcement on the material weakness, we were focused on shoring up their capital, reducing their exposure to commercial real estate, and bolstering their management team, making sure the deposits don't leave and making sure their employees don't leave. Now you're adding on this other issue with a material weakness that they flagged on their internal controls. It looks like that weakness is not going to drive further provisioning for their 2023 results. So that's good, but it doesn't really say anything about future provisioning for bad debt in their commercial real estate. So that's an ongoing concern.
Talk to me about the idea of deposits leaving the bank. I mean, this is a bank that owns Flagstar as well. And the fact that it's not called New York Community Bank is probably an advantage to the people who are at that bank, because I'm wondering if consumers even realize that the parent company of their regional bank is struggling like this.
Right. So that's an interesting point. They have a model where they have their bank branches that were named not New York Community, but other names like Roslyn Savings and others. And they recently revamped the entire franchise to be Flagstar. So all the branches going forward are now named Flagstar Bank. So one other thing I would note is that their deposits, there's a very small sliver of their deposit base that's uninsured. And so that is a defensive measure, right? Because with SVB, 95% of their deposits were insured, and then they subsequently left.
Meaning those deposits were over the FDIC limit at that time last year. So to what extent should investors be concerned about deposits actually fleeing the bank? Do we have any indication that that's happening yet?
Right. So they did offer an update earlier in February that showed their deposits actually increased from year end. But that update didn't incorporate the Moody's downgrade, and they failed to update it during their most recent disclosures over the past couple of days. So we still don't know how the deposits have reacted over the past few weeks.
How do you as a bank have material weaknesses in how you track your loan risks? Isn't that what your business is?
It is. So it's really discouraging to hear that. And I think that's one of the reasons why their chief risk officer and their accounting executive left last year, because they needed to shore up their capabilities on that front.
Yeah. I'm just like, that's what you do, right? I mean, if you can't kind of keep on top of that.
And they historically also had very low reserves to their multifamily and office loans. So I think that had something to do with it as well.
Talk to us about the multifamily exposure here. We have a great chart to kind of show everybody and how New York Community Bancorp compares with some other names that are out there. Bank United, M&T, Webster Financial, Customers Bancorp. I mean, NYCB has a much bigger exposure here. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So they are the go-to bank for rent-regulated apartment lending here in the New York area. That's their bread and butter business. They've been doing it for decades. They dominate the business. But rent-regulated apartments have been struggling over the past few years, ever since a 2019 law from New York that really restricted the rent increases that landlords can do. So it's really reduced the value of those apartments, and coupled with the fact where interest rates are today, it makes for a tougher business model going forward, because the cash flows are really impaired.
So does that mean that New York Community Bank is unique in its exposure there? So the contagion question, once again, is really contained to New York Community Bank?
That's right. So I think that's what the market is telling you, because the rest of the banks are really trading fractionally down, maybe over 1%. So the market has realized that this is a New York community-specific issue, and there are no other banks within other large regional banks that really have that multifamily rent-regulated exposure.
All right, so that's good to know. So for a little bit, so it sounds like it's very company-specific. Let's talk about the new CEO that's taking over, brought in for this turnaround. Successful run at Flagstar Bancorp. As you said, that's now really the company that's in charge. He was there for a long time, was really good there. What do we know about him? What skills does he bring to maybe change the risk profile, or at least the risk awareness, and making sure sure the right systems are in place?
Yeah, so he has done a great turnaround, with Flagstar. It was a troubled institution at one point, and he was able to really shore up their issues from the regulatory front. There was an OCC consent order, which the management team was able to lift, and then subsequently it was sold to New York Community as a way to diversify New York Community's multifamily concentration. So it was clear in February when they did a update call with the street and Sandro, the now CEO, he was lifted to executive chairman, and he led that call. So it wasn't a surprise that they made this CEO change.
But what could NYCB do given its exposure to multifamily rent regulated apartments?
Yeah, it's a tough spot.
Because it's not like new leadership necessarily could change that.
Right. There's nothing in the immediate horizon that they can do to change that. There's not a lot of demand for that business and that lending because of the issues that we described earlier. So they're going to have to manage through it, make sure their deposits don't leave, and increase their capital quarter by quarter.
Herman, do you think there's a chance that the federal government needs to come in and save this bank?
It really depends on the deposits, as we mentioned earlier. As long as they have liquidity and they don't have a bank run, which we have no indication that that's happening as of right now, then they can just sort of muddle through over the next several quarters.
Again, that's not in their control.
Right.
That's in the control of their depositors.
Right.
And as we saw a year ago, if depositors get freaked out, then they run.
Right.
I guess their messaging is in control. Like they can communicate with their depositors, but if people get scared, they can pick up their phone and make transfers very quickly.
Right. And their depositors are these large landlords in New York City that own these multifamily properties. If they get freaked out, then it becomes a bigger question. But as of right now, it seems like they're seem to be placated by the actions of the bank.
But it does sound like that until they get out of this business, that this is going to be an overhang, right? So that's longer term, that they've got to figure a way to unravel themselves from it.
Right. So that's been one of the priorities when they had their fourth quarter earnings call, is to diversify their way out of multifamily. But it's easier said than done.
Yeah, sure, because everybody knows what the rules are now, right? Like who ultimately wants it. Hey, just got about a minute left here. Who, since we've got you here, that you continue to keep on your orbit when it comes to some of the regionals? Because this conversation, just when we think it's kind of calmed down, something creeps up and it's back on our radar.
Yeah, so the banks that have higher concentration in commercial real estate have been flagged by the market. Banks like Valley is one that seems to pop up a lot, but it seems like at this point it's more New York community specific than anything else.
If Torsten Slok is right and we don't get any Fed rate cuts this year, is that going to be maybe problematic for some banks that are still out there, some of the regionals, just quickly?
Yes, it would be problematic.
Eccomi qua ragazzi, eccomi qua.
When these loans come due,
Si rimane là a 3,30.
We need lower interest rates to really spur some loan demand, which has been anemic for the past several quarters.
All right, great stuff. Always appreciate it. Our Bloomberg Intelligence.
Questo magari si fa tutta la serata così, arriva qua, poi a fine serata arriva a 400 e lo buttano giù. Sarebbe proprio colpo basso che il mercato è in grado di fare tranquillamente. 5 minuti.
From DEI language after this.
Things are changing, definitely. That's no doubt about it. This on a day, just a quick check on the markets. You've got a rally underway. And right now, folks, equities pretty much, Tim, at their best levels of the day.
Hey, let's get
Vediamo un po' che fa il Dow nel frattempo.
Thanks, Tim. The government is changing the guidance for COVID-19 and respiratory illnesses. The CDC now says if you are fever-free for 24 hours without medication
sta salendo nel
and
frattempo.
your symptoms are subsiding, you can return to work or school. CDC Director Mandy Cohen explains to Bloomberg why they're making the change.
We are in a new place, so we were able to put out this updated guidance again because we're seeing
Dow rompe i minimi a mezz'ora.
CDC Director Mandy Cohen also says 95% of
Vediamo se
people
li
who went to the hospital
riassorbe.
with COVID this season had not received an updated COVID vaccine.
Attenzione. Attenzione. Minimi dalle 20. Capace li ricomprano. Vediamo S&P. Stessa cosa, Nasdaq. Io nel frattempo vedo pure qua i titoli singoli. Nvidia 8,21 e 40 proprio. Ormai Meta sta ritracciando leggermente. 501,6. 501,5.
A New Jersey businessman is signing a cooperation deal and pleading guilty to trying to bribe Senator Bob Menendez. The senator and his wife face corruption charges at a trial in May. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons.
Divergenze ribassiste pazzesche. Pazzesche sull'H4 su S&P. E VIX che pompa. Community Bancorp, dice Fabio Maggioni, torna a scendere pesante. Andrea Gatti dice da poco tirano il tappeto prima che David torna. Simona dice Community Bancorp ha scoperto di essere deboloccia sull'analisi del valore dei prestiti. Io non credo ad un bilancio bancario, nemmeno se me lo certifica il buon Dio. Giustamente. Qua che fa? Si è bloccato Bloomberg. Mo lo riattiviamo. Questo è il 15 minuti del Nasdaq. Nvidia perde $1 nel frattempo. 820,73. Con tassi in crescita non possono diminuire i non performing loan. Infatti, cioè, una follia. Oh, Nasdaq ha rotto i minimi del 15 minuti per la seconda volta nell'ultima mezz'ora. Per la seconda volta nell'ultima mezz'ora. L'ultima volta l'ha fatto alle 6. Da lì minimi non sono stati mai rotti. Attenzione.
I don't think he even had almost a conception at some point that it was wrong or right. I think he just had the mentality that he has to win.
This committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX.
So, Mark.
Are you in? I'm in.
I'm in. We're in.
Vediamo che succede sui titoli singoli. Oh, allora? Apple, Amazon rimane lì sopra, Google, Microsoft, anche lei rompe i minimi sul quarto d'ora, anche Meta. Vediamo Nvidia. Oh, e dai. Nvidia sta qua. E poi Tesla che sta provando. Ritorniamo su Nasdaq, va che è meglio.
The company raised over $1 billion from investors including Stellantis, Boeing, United Airlines and Cathie Wood's ARK Investment Management.
Does that ARK investment open doors for you to bring in different kinds of institutional money going forward?
It does. I mean, I think there's a lot of credibility that comes in with an investor like ARK. As I think about, you know, my top targets of investors over the next 2 to 3 years, an investment like that gives us some credibility and gives us a
Orazio dice probabile discesa del Nasdaq a 2,60. Cozza dice guarda anche loro cosa ha fatto oggi, una cosa assurda. Sì, l'abbiamo visto prima, 2000, oltre 2080, ora 2086. Bitcoin che combina, rimane lì. Nasdaq rimane là sui 18,315. Giusto ritracciamentino al momento. Vediamo il 5 minuti, va, per sicurezza. Vediamo l'orario. Cioè, questo se ne torna sotto 2,40 oppure più giù. No, questo non scende per niente. Comunque, buon indizio è il VIX che sale. Già sta tentando di riscendere, un pochino.
China's budget plans, economic outlook, and geopolitical tensions. Coverage
Simona Bonanite dice: dati BCE di ieri su 572 miliardi di prestiti immobiliari, il 7,5 è a rischio, il 2,5 è irrecuperabile. Alla faccia. Beh, il 2,5 stiamo parlando di oltre 10 miliardi. Il 7,5 è a rischio, quindi 7,5 praticamente circa 57 miliardi si potrebbero volatilizzare, diciamo così. Vabbè, capirai. Nvidia se li fa con 2 minuti. Scherzo, ovviamente, però non è poco. Nasdaq 308, 307. Vediamo che combina, va.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 2:40 the time right now on Wall Street. We do have stocks and records with the S&P
300. Se l'ATR parte a nord, la tendenza intrapresa dell'ultima candela non muta. Rimetto l'ATR, va.
185 right now, higher by 1.1%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 73, up by 0.2%. Bonds climbed as disappointing factory data and a decline in consumer sentiment solidified bets on rate cuts, with traders also sifting through the latest remarks from a slew of Federal Reserve speakers. 10-year at 4.17%, the 2-year 4.52%. Spot gold up $41 the ounce now to $2,086, up by 2%, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up 2.2%, just about $80 a barrel. Boeing is in discussions to acquire Spirit Aero Systems Holdings, a move that would reclaim control of its struggling former aerostructures unit and the main supplier at the center of numerous quality.
3 minuti alla chiusura di questo 15 minuti, eh. Nel frattempo l'ATR sta andando verso nord, come dice il nostro buon Fabio. Siamo nella fascia calda. Ultime ore di fuoco.
I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovich.
Nel frattempo con la coda dell'occhio mi guardo il Dow.
Making its way into corporate speak. Tim, not sure if you've noticed.
I have to confess I have not noticed.
Well,
because I have not been reading all the 10Ks that our next guest has been reading.
What is wrong with you?
I don't read 10Ks at night.
Apparently not. Well, terms such as
Il Dow deve cedere, che è il più debole di tutti. È il Dow che deve cedere, ma deve scendere ancora parecchio per cedere definitivamente.
Businesses, big and small, grapple with the conservative backlash against diversity initiatives. So writes the Bloomberg News team of Jeff Green and Simone Foxman, both our equality team reporters. Jeff joining us from Detroit this afternoon, Simone here in the Bloomberg studio. Jeff, I want to start with you and just take a step back here. How did this whole thing get on your radar here? Because I think small changes within 10Ks are not necessarily something that people pick up on.
Yeah, well, one of the reporters mentioned it in one of the companies he was covering as an aside, and it wasn't that big of a deal in the company he cited.
2 minuti alla chiusura di questo 15 minuti.
The more I found, and some of these were terms that have been just standbys, boilerplate, if you will, for several years.
Paolo Matt dice 30 minuti fa il VIX faceva meno 0,6, ora fa più 0,6. Buonasera ragazzi, buonasera Paolo. Ritraccia leggermente Nvidia, si porta a più 3,62.
Over the last couple of years, certainly coming off the pandemic, certainly coming off the death of George Floyd. Talk to us a little bit, dig a little bit deeper for us, specifically what they're dropping, what they're not writing about or including in any of those official filings.
Things like allyship, mandatory allyship training, that was one that dropped off. Anti-racist is one we highlighted because Uber didn't say we just want to not have racism. They said we want to become an anti-racist company. They said that for 3 years in a row. So when it dropped, it seemed notable. And that is one thing to be aware of. This is not like a company used the term 1 year and then the next year they didn't. Most of the time, this was 2 or 3 years of the same wording, and then suddenly it was changed. I used that criteria, in fact, Simone and I both did, to make sure we only looked for stuff that seemed to have been a pretty significant change. So this was This was something that we felt like was on purpose, even if the companies aren't admitting it.
Okay, so Simone Foxman, come on in here. If this is on purpose, why is this happening? What are the external or
Vediamo se
internal
DAX
factors
molla,
that
il
are
DAO,
causing companies
scusate,
to
molla.
change their language around this stuff?
Well, certainly we live in a political environment where there is a lot of blowback against these three-letter acronyms, DEI and ESG. So there are people
Vediamo se
out
su
there
15 minuti il DAO prova a fare altra ventina di punti giù. Adesso stiamo a 39.053 sul DAO. Si affonda sotto i 39.030, forse si potrebbe scendere. 3 secondi alla chiusura, Nasdaq chiude negativo sul 15 minuti. Nasdaq chiude al di sopra del minimo della candela precedente, quindi
Well, Simone, like we're here, right, is lawsuits also about the company, right?
Absolutely.
And being targeted in an environment where companies
tosta
are
ancora.
targeted by either politicians or just individual consumers and so on because of what they say are their woke policies.
And plenty of
Sì, il DAO si deve fare un'altra trentina di punti sotto, altrimenti deve ritornare a 39.030 il DAO, perché se no non si scende neanche a calci. Questo è il DAO, grafico a 15 minuti. Deve scendere qua sotto 30 per eventualmente confermare un ribasso, secondo me. No, c'è il rischio che si rimane tutta la serata così. Questo è il 15 minuti del Nasdaq.
Let's narrow this in. Let's try and make things more vague. We don't need to put it all out there. And I should note, all these companies really are saying to us, we still are going ahead with our commitment to diversity and inclusion, but what they're writing in these heavily lawyered documents is just different, and we're trying to figure out exactly what that means going forward.
So pick up on that, Jeff, because that's what Simone ended with is what I want to ask you. Is there any indication that companies are actually acting different in terms of their policies or the way they're hiring or the way they're managing based on this language change?
Yeah, majority of companies seem to still be doing what they want to do, just trying to not make it so evident. And there has been some sloppiness. This is not just, some of this is actually good for these companies to take a harder look at what they've been saying and what they've been doing, because it has just sort of been free up until recently. You could kind of say and do whatever you wanted because it just was seen as doing good to do well and all those sorts of things. And now there's a little more scrutiny. But so far it seems like
Un silenzio che vale più di 1000 parole comunque, ragazzi. Berna 23 dice poche candele verdi oggi, mamma mia, più che altro tutte di fila. Roberto dice dollaro yen dopo ore ha fatto una bella inversione, da confermare, può essere un segnale. Non lo sto vedendo dollaro yen.
It doesn't seem like there's a wholesale change in how big companies are approaching DEI. And it could be different in 5 or 10
Sente ancora
years.
la zona buy, questa qui.
Here's a case specifically about how businesses should operate.
Sente ancora
I
questa.
want to ask this to both of you, and Simone, let me ask you first. I mean,
Questo è
how
il
willing
DAO.
to talk about this with you guys?
Un DAO così non va bene. Il rischio che prossima ora prova ad andare ancora su. Questo è il 15 minuti di Nasdaq. Ancora 10 minuti per la chiusura.
That said, I think no one really wants to stick their neck out on anything related to diversity and inclusion right now. We certainly heard that from companies.
Well, so Jeff, how about you come on in on this? But I mean, I feel like also net what you guys said is that even if they're dropping it from those official corporate filings, they're still pursuing their strategies.
Nvidia torna a 8,21. Meta a ridosso dei 503. Apple e Google sono le uniche negative con circa mezzo punto percentuale di ribasso, quindi veramente poca roba. Il trend è qua ancora long, pure sul 4 ore, pure sul 2 ore.
information out of the
Ho
text
paura che andiamo a
and
chiudere la
maybe we
serata
did a
così.
specialized document that was more focused on the topic to basically
Magari c'è un'ultima accelerazione al rialzo
Jeff, does this mirror what's happening in terms
e
of
poi
other
vendono
parts of
dopo,
companies right now?
a chiusura
Like, are you
mercato.
starting to see this show up in any of the statistics that you track
Il mercato
over
è
Bloomberg?
capace tranquillamente di fare
Yeah,
queste
if you look at
zozzate
there's a chart on the
tremende.
story, if you happen to have access to it, that kind of shows the trajectory of just mentions of DEI and diversity on corporate calls and in other sort of public-facing pronouncements is clearly on the decline as well, which is one of the reasons we anticipated it would show up in corporate filings.
Yeah, it is pretty worth checking it out at Bloomberg.com or on the Bloomberg to see what's happening. Just interesting to see how the pendulum swings in terms of companies, especially when it comes to what they put out publicly. And it'll be interesting to see ultimately where it all settles, maybe over the next couple of years.
Also notable, I think it's happening during an election year, and people seem increasingly polarized as we head into November.
Yeah, exactly.
And this stuff is polarizing.
Yeah, absolutely, and can certainly sway maybe how people vote ultimately. All right, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Jeff Green and Simone Foxman of our quality team, both reporters on that space. Just head to Bloomberg.com to read the whole story and check out more of their reporting. Also, you can find it on the Bloomberg terminal. All right, our thanks to the team. Coming up next, though, Options Insight with Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. A little bit of market talk on this day when we're seeing equities up and yields backing off a little bit. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Vediamo al volo il Dow. Nasdaq sta ritornando ai 3,30. Vediamo il minuto del Nasdaq, eccolo qua. Questo sta provando a ritornare sopra addirittura. Questo è il 3 minuti. Speriamo che sente.
The geopolitical environment, US-China, Ukraine, is it inability to pass the debt limit extension? What are you most worried about?
I think most of the time I would answer the same way, a financial crisis. As I worry a lot about the Chinese invading Taiwan and World War III coming on. But in that case, I don't think whether you invest with David Rubenstein or Cliff Asness is the really big issue. So I think a financial crisis I worry about because they're very unpredictable. After the fact, everyone predicted them. But before the fact, they're not very predictable. I don't think anyone wants a financial crisis. You think you'll do well, and something happens that boomerangs, and you don't.
Well, as we talk, we've seen Silicon Valley Bank basically go under and have to be bought. And there are other banks that have some challenges. Are you worried about a banking crisis or not so much?
Worried enough to put it on my worry list. I have no special knowledge of banks, commercial real estate and banks that deal in that, maybe a more nerve-wracking place, how that shakes out in cities. So yeah, those things worry me, but not especially more. I think even before SVB, I would have said financial crisis is a very low probability. When someone says their biggest worry, doesn't mean they think it's likely. It means they think it's possible and would be terrible.
Always on the heartbeat of the tech sector.
Spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the...
Now, your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World
S&P praticamente uguale, stessa cosa.
Technology shares, they're now up 31.4%. Dell is surging after reporting better than expected sales and profit fueled by demand for information technology equipment to handle artificial intelligence work. Known for its PC business, Dell has attracted investor attention over the last year due to a spike in interest for its high-powered servers needed to run AI workloads. Again, Dell shares, they're up now by 31.8%. The other high-profile earnings report after the close of trading last night was Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. It reduced its outlook for sales growth and profit in the current fiscal year, citing lower demand for networking products and a crunch in computer chip availability. HPE said revenue will increase as much as 2%. Previously, HPE saw 2 to 4% annual growth. Today, HPE, its shares are higher by 2.2%. A stock we've been
Dow non ce la sta facendo.
Business Week, the commercial real estate lender New York Community Bancorp. That stock is now plunging by 24.3% after the lender said it discovered material weaknesses in how it tracks loan risks. It wrote down the value of companies acquired years ago and replaced its leadership to grapple with the turmoil. This announcement reignited a drama that erupted at the end of January when the company, a major lender to New York apartment landlords, said it was stockpiling cash to cover potential problems with loans. The shares of New York Community Bancorp, they are lower now by 24.5%. And those are some of the top company stories that we're watching for you at this hour. I'm Charlie Pelletan. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Kara Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week, and now it's time for our weekly Options Insight with Bloomberg News and Markets reporter Abigail Doolittle and Christian Fromhertz, CEO of Tribeca Trade Group. Abigail.
Thanks so much, Tim. And Christian, it's great to have you with us on this Friday and this rally that we've been seeing not just this year, but out of the October 2023 lows and truly out of the October 2022 lows. And you could also make the case out of the 2020 lows. It just seems unstoppable, but especially this part out of the October lows. I mean, it's really straight up for the S&P 500.
5 minuti alla chiusura, anzi 4, e qui si rimane qua sopra.
2000 is about 15% below its record high. When you put all this together, do you think that stocks are going to continue on this trajectory, or do you think that there's some kind of pause ahead?
Hey, Abigail, great to be here. And yeah, I mean, the markets right now and basically through the last couple of weeks have had some really great momentum. And that even comes in a weaker seasonal traditional period for the market too. So, I have to say it's pretty impressive. Some of the arguments that we heard last year that it's only a couple groups of stocks, we're seeing very different types of markets. When you look under the hood right now, you're seeing things like industrials, the healthcare, biotech, materials, right? All of these areas, and how can I forget, the semiconductors, which have been kind of the star over the last month too, really break out. And, I think overall there's some really good tailwinds behind the market.
Yeah, it does look like some breadth is building.
Attenzione al Nasdaq che sta provando a fare nuovi massimi.
9 of 11 are higher, most of them by 2.5% or more. There's one bearish divergence though that's been happening in all the indexes. The RSI is caught in a series of lower highs, whereas we have these record highs, basically suggesting that weak hands are buying to some extent. But does that worry you at all?
Well, I mean, it's important to note when we do see some divergences, and the RSI indicator or study is one of them to look at. But those things can be worked off. And one of the things that I also keep an eye on is looking at the 4-week new highs versus new lows, and the S&P as well as the 52-week. And right now that's more of confirming rather than showing a
qui Batman
than breaking down.
Non si può creare Batman, serve un allungo.
So that would probably mean that you like the S&P 500.
Sul 5 minuti.
About your options trade there.
Yeah, sure, and this is a
Dove il testo adesso è a 200 ore lontana anni luce dal prezzo.
about the Magnificent Seven. So, we just
Un
saw a
like
big
per il
move on
Nasdaq,
RSP
dice Fabio
calls. This is
Maggiori.
the equally weighted ETF. September 170 calls going up for about $5. There's some good weight behind that trade, about $3 million. I like that, and from a technical standpoint as well, as the RSP has been breaking above recent resistance over the last couple weeks.
Terrific stuff. First, Christian Fromhartz of Tribeca Trade Group, thanks for joining us for Options Insight. Carol, back to you.
All right, great stuff. Taking notes there that we're going to use in our market chats. Abigail, Christian, thank you so much. All right, for those of you watching on television, the close, as you know, is coming your way in just a moment. Bloomberg Business Week, though, continuing on radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. And Tim, we've got to talk about what Boeing's up to.
Yeah, shares of Spirit Aerosystems just popping on the news that Boeing could be taking back control of the troubled company. This is one, Carol, that spun off to private equity about 2 decades ago.
So owned it, got rid of it, now maybe wants it again.
I think I tweeted this, what's old is new again.
That's the way it works. All right, we're going to check.
Vediamo come chiude l'orario, va. Ovviamente positivo.
New York are fueling a boom in a Tony Hamlet. That's outside New York City. I believe this is our most read story in the Bloomberg today.
Plus, what's coming up on Wall Street?
Vediamo l'orario del Dow, pure questo.
Yeah, and then we've got an update on gender
Positivo.
equality on the boards of publicly listed US companies. Got a hint.
5 ore consecutive di rialzo.
Are you surprised?
Russell pure sembra voler addirittura allungare al rialzo.
We're going to talk to the head of a company that wants to take you 100,000 feet above the earth in a balloon. It's all coming your way. This is
Il Nasdaq.
Six rate cuts, 3 rate cuts. How about no rate cuts this year at all? Live from Studio 2 here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York, I'm Romain Bostic.
Pretty bold call.
It is a bold call,
And
Alex Seal.
is that like kind of more hikes?
Vediamo se il
in
Nasdaq
theory?
prova a
All right,
scendere.
let's kick you off to the closing bell right here in the U.S. I'm Alex Steele. All right, so the S&P is up by 0.8%. We got ISM manufacturing with the headline level didn't look great, but underneath things are holding up really, really well. And you do see that reflected within the equity market. A big part of that is going to be tech. However, you take a look at the Russell 2000, we're still up 1%. So that outperformance continuing. If the economy was rolling over, would you really see small caps continue to outperform? I want to take a look at the 210 curve because you had Governor Waller of the Fed in a semi-annual report. There's a meeting for Fed officials going on right now. Our own Michael McKee is there, basically saying that he wants the Fed to buy more in the front end of the curve. So you really see a bull steepener here because more demand coming in the front end of the curve. So yields a bit higher there on the back end. And crude over 80, or was over 80 for the first time since November. I don't know, Romain, is that because of demand? Stronger economy? You tell me.
Yeah, a big self-move in the commodity space, something I think we should focus a little bit more on, Alex, but there's so much to
Questo è Russell, sta rimanendo inchiodato lì sopra. Questo è il Dow. 2 ore ha chiuso positivo, sto maledetto.
The strongest February performance for the S&P and the Nasdaq since 2015, feeding into a strong start here.
Attenzione al
in March
Nasdaq,
2024, as many traders still clinging to their belief that the Fed will cut interest rates, and they will do so multiple times this year. That is the consensus on Wall Street, but at least one person out there is ready to break consensus and say what seemed unthinkable just a few weeks ago, that the Fed maybe won't cut rates at all. Apollo chief economist Torsten Slok telling clients in a note that a re-accelerating U.S. economy will prevent the FOMC from easing. Tom Keene had a chance to catch up with Torsten this morning and ask him for an explanation.
The market now has to realize that the data is just not slowing down, and the Fed pivot has given an additional tailwind to the economy and to financial markets and financial conditions and to capital markets. And all that is likely to continue to be supporting growth in consumer spending, in capex spending, in hiring for most likely the better part of this year.
Now, if that sounds familiar, maybe it's because, well, Fed members have been saying something similar for weeks now. Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic just today reiterating he wants to wait to start cutting. 5 other Fed officials speaking today on the same topic, and next week The Grand Poobah, Fed Chair
Attenzione,
Jerome Powell, Alex, will have to say something, I would think, because he's got 2 days of testimony on Capitol Hill.
VIX è ritornato a zero praticamente.
Push back on a weak economy and their constituents, whereas the numbers continue to be really good. So here is, I tried to sum up what Torsten Slot was talking about. He had a lot of points and a lot of charts in his notes. So I decided to go ahead and pick this one. So the white line is the Bloomberg U.S. Financial Conditions Index. When it goes down, it means conditions are tightening. It goes up, it means conditions are loosening. And the blue line is the S&P. And I mean, I don't know, just look at it. They're really tracking each other here. You saw the bottom there in October for both, and then a grind higher. Financial conditions, looser, looser, looser. Equity markets, higher, higher, higher. And that's continuing. What's going to slow that down? I think the point is, if you have financial conditions continue to be loose, why would you then wind up cutting?
Attenzione, Nasdaq 310.
Would you be cutting into a better economy, and how would that really work, Romain?
Well, the answer to that, I guess, depends on, well, how you actually view the economy. Let's get the view of our first guest to help us kick off to the close here on this Friday afternoon. Kathy Bazanjic joining us right now, Chief Economist over at Nationwide. Kathy, great to see you.
Tiene questi livelli è un problema.
I do want to get your thoughts really on kind of where we
Tiene questi livelli è un problema.
You saw the CPI, PPI the week before. You've seen the GDP numbers. I don't know. It seems like a strong economy to me, unless there's something else out there we should be paying attention to.
Well, hi, Romain. Always good to talk to you. Yeah, there's, a lot of momentum in the economy. So, I do, have some sympathy for what Torsten Slot is saying. Financial conditions have eased at a time when, we do have that strong momentum. Does raise the question, does the Fed really need to cut rates? But I think if you look beneath some of the numbers of the headline, you do see some slowing in activity. Real consumer spending, which we got yesterday, was negative on the month. And that suggests that, maybe the consumers rein things in a little bit. We had a big pop in personal income, but the savings rate is still really low, well below 4%. So, and we're seeing delinquencies on credit cards and auto loans increase. So to me,
Jacopo dice non è aria, ricomprano tutto.
Is sort of overextended at this point, or at least portions of it, and they're not prepared.
Cristina dice ad ogni modo si è fermato sulla testa del brontosauro. Te immagini precipita lungo le zampe? Chissà. Magari rimane sulla testa. Quello è un problema. Guarda, per me provano un'ultima accelerazione di brutto e poi forse provano il ribasso. Poi forse provano il ribasso. Comunque, dice Fabio, in qualsiasi caso è un doppio massimo con divergenza, resto dell'idea che abbia dato. Paolo dice il DAX è stato ore, le ultime tra meno 0,01 e lo 0. Idem il FIB bloccato da ore, per me qualcosa nel finale, mi dice scaricone. Sperando che non fa uno squeeze tremendo al rialzo, però. Fabio dice altrimenti mi mangio 1000 pagine del Pring. Martin J. Pring. Jacopo dice quale idea Fabio? Paolo dice dato il VIX è andato in positivo e DAX e FIB morti inchiodati altri giorni sarebbero entrambi volati, ma son di parte, o nel finale o al massimo lunedì. Sono troppo in eccesso gli americani, vediamo se fa tutto dal trampolino dei 100 metri. Fa il tuffo, scusa, dal trampolino dei 100 metri. La zona molto lavorata che si vede potrebbe essere un test. Questa qua sotto, qua 3,10, 3,15.
So, does this though become like a chicken and an egg thing? So, everything you're saying is true, and if we get weak data points, then we start to sort of start pricing that in, but then we anticipate that the Fed will cut, maybe bring forward those cuts. Therefore, that loosens financial conditions and actually inhibits the transmission of monetary policy. Is that the kind of weird hamster wheel that we're in?
Well, usually the Fed does, ease and cut interest rates and financial conditions ease once there's signs of a slowing.
È tutto clamorosamente fermo.
But this time it does seem a bit different, right? That they're going
Tutto clamorosamente fermo.
being slower to ease and cut rates. There's that old adage, right? They ride the elevator on the way down and the escalator on the way up when they're raising rates, and the opposite this time, right? And I think that just still, gives us some pause there, right? Again, things look good, but when they cut rates, it's supposed to help buffer the economy, but it doesn't really necessarily save it from a downturn.
All right, Kathy, always great to talk to you. Kathy Pachancic there, chief economist at Nationwide, helping us
Il
get
DAO
to
sta
the close
cedendo.
here on this Friday afternoon with a lot of great interviews up ahead on the big program, including a sit down with Antonio Neri, the CEO
Perlomeno
of
ci sta
HPE
provando.
as a company, cutting its full year forecast. His take on what's driving the slowdown in corporate IT investment.
Except that's Governor Waller, or Williams, or Waller, one of those guys. Anyway, we're also going to take a look at Fubo. It is on the move after the sports streaming platform released some results. A conversation with the CEO, David Gandler, about the report, as well as the company's legal battles against the likes of Disney.
Il DAO sta provando a accedere. 35, 32, 29. Vediamo se allunga. Se allunga il DAO, devono allungare pure gli altri. Vediamo Nasdaq. DAO ha rotto i 30. Sull'orario sta provando ad andare giù. Perlomeno sembra ci stia provando. Nasdaq, vediamo un po' se rompe i minimi dell'orario precedente. Mazza, li riassorbe subito. Anche ha fatto in tempo. Pure il DAO qua. Pure S&P scaricano 5140. Vediamo se la allungano qua.
The younger generations are more, of course, pay more attention to sustainability, and so they
Ora se la stanno vedendo con i compratori di qui.
But you have to make sure you're authentic because they hate greenwashing. But what is very important to remember is that none of them, whether they're young or not, will ever sacrifice product quality and efficacy to sustainability, which is why part of the big transformation of our R&I, where there's this €1 billion we spend every year, most of it is spent on transforming our formulas from petrochemicals to biosourced ingredients.
Nasdaq rimane a 300, 304, 305. È il DAO che deve cedere. Questa è il mezz'ora del DAO.
Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg. Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a
Dal
day.
2023 il DAO.
Context changes
E mo
everything.
se la vedono con questi. Questi qua. 30.030 appunto. Se la vedono con questi qui. Che hanno comprato praticamente tra le 18:30 e le 19:45 praticamente.
Some fresh details as to when that might happen. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Reddit is preparing to IPO this month, here in the month of March, and looking to aim for a valuation range of $31 to $34 a share in that IPO. That would give it a valuation of about $6.5 billion. Once again, this is based on reporting from the Wall Street Journal. Their reporters finding, based on people familiar with the situation, that Reddit
Nasdaq
will
sempre
debut at some point
18,3.
this month, looking for a range of $31 to $34 a share, Alex.
All right, looking forward to that. They're also allowing some employees to sell some shares in that IPO. All right, let's get to shares of HPE. They're in the green after initial weakness. The company cutting its full-year forecast, citing lower demand for networking products and a crunch in computer chip availability. Romain and I sat down with CEO Antonio Neri about the outlook.
Supply start to improve. We already have a lot of supply, but it's being now held through either
Nasdaq cede 2,94.
customer readiness to accept these products because they need a
Deve affondare pure il DAO però.
And in some cases, they are taking a little bit longer than we expected. And we're going to have a lot of revenue converted in the back half because of those two issues are going to be much better managed, I will say.
Per 15 minuti del
Continue
Nasdaq.
to be long. I mean, in the 20 plus weeks. So this is the reality we're dealing with. And we are setting expectation up front with customers that obviously is going to take that long time to get it. But the demand continues to be very strong. The pipeline is very strong. We see now demand in the enterprise space, in the inferencing side. And this is one of the benefits remaining with the as-a-service model, because these systems are very expensive, need a lot of power. Most of the times they don't have neither the power, the cooling, the space. And honestly, they don't want to outlay that massive amount of CapEx up front. So that's why our HP GreenLake value proposition is going to help us going forward. And that also will smooth the revenue linearity of these systems.
So that recovery in terms of lead time, does that wind up explaining why your back half of this year outlook looks a little bit better? You cut your full year guidance, but it does still look a little bit backloaded. Is that why?
Part of Alex, and also part because we also have a lot of systems now being installed. That takes another couple of quarters to get the acceptances. Remember that these systems, we recognize revenue at the time of acceptance, not at the type of shipments. And so you have a combination of better supply
Fatica troppo.
and a significant number of acceptances
Fatica
that
troppo.
will materialize in the back half.
Well, what I don't understand, maybe you can help me clarify, is that Dell seems to be doing pretty well.
Fatica
so I'm just
troppo.
wondering
Stanno
what the
tutti
difference
troppo
is
positivi.
between
L'unico che sta
you and
cedendo un
Dell.
po' è
Is it
Apple,
the GPUs? Like, where's
Google
the trickiness
pure.
for you?
I don't think there is a much
Prova a
difference,
cedere
to be
un
honest
po'.
with you.
But the
We
investors
have,
think so because the stocks are reacting differently.
Yeah, well, I think the networking softness is actually affecting us. Dell doesn't have a networking business at all. And remember that we deliver amazing growth in the last 2 years, and now you're going a little bit of a slowdown.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the AI, we booked $4 billion of cumulative orders, and we have grown equal or maybe even in some cases better than Dell. But our backlog sits at $3 billion. As I looked at yesterday, Dell has $2.9 billion. And the difference for us is going to be a favor for us as we go forward because we have deep expertise in data center services. Dell does not have that. We have 2 data centers that now are up and operational to provide GPU as a service to customers. That will be a benefit. Third is we have a networking business
Troppa
to scale
fatica.
the systems that they don't have either, particularly with HP Slingshot. And fourth is HP GreenLake.
Stanno faticando da morire.
Customers' ability to access this technology without paying CapEx. Today, Alex, the vast majority of the action we have seen has been in mobile builders, and those are, our customers, they just outlay a lot of capital, and then, they just need GPU as a bare metal.
A lot of analysts raised concerns on the call about the acquisition of Juniper Networks, a pending acquisition, I should say, and whether that pending acquisition did maybe cause a little bit of a chill for customers adopting new orders in the quarter.
We have not lost one single deal. Every single customer and partner we talk to, they're very excited about this combination. Because through this AI inflection point, you're going to need more network ports, not less ports. And the ability to really bring together the AI native world and the cloud native world is where customers are going to struggle. And as you think about the combination, HPE will double the size.
Dario dice sempre live, come mai? Guarda che chiusura, la mia regola del primo mese. Ora chiuderà salendo Nasdaq, dice Gianluca. 15 minuti e 30 confermato, manca l'orario sotto la 5 ore. 1884 è l'ultima candela con una wick pronunciata. Paolo Matt dice orario Nasdaq eclissato, candela precedente, manca solo andare sotto la 5 ore. 6 soldati orari così grossi raramente si vedono tutti insieme dopo un rally di più 20 negli ultimi mesi senza respiro. Metti l'orario e bande di Bollinger a M5 e stocastico, se vanno sotto la 5 ore diretto al super trend oltre 100 punti dalla 5 ore. Guarda, e questo se ne viene giù veramente, se ne viene giù pesante proprio, basta. Cioè, non so. L'unico problema rimane sempre la dinamica a 4 ore. Può venire qua a 130, ti è. Qua c'è il Dow che sta proprio faticando per scendere con una maniera allucinante.
All right, got to go here. We'll be back in a moment here with a closer focus on the streaming wars, the future of streaming, with the CEO of Fubo TV. Stick around. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
Questo è il DAO.
I'm Alex Rodriguez. I'm a former New York Yankee and played professional baseball for over 20 years. Almost that entire time, I was thinking about business.
And I'm Jason Kelly. I've been a business journalist at Bloomberg for more than 2 decades. And across my career, I've covered everything from the Olympics to Wall Street.
From Bloomberg, this is The Deal. Each week, you'll hear us in conversation with business icons.
This show will explore deal-making across sports, media, and entertainment.
This is very fancy for a podcast.
If I knew what it was going to be, I'd have put everything I had into it.
I get asked more about our relationship than I do my wife. And you know what I'm saying?
This is a show where we talk with big-time athletes and executives about the wins, the losses, and lessons learned along the way.
This show is called The Deal.
The Deal?
The Deal. The Deal. That deal. The Deal.
Huge deal.
Who dug this up? What are y'all in trouble?
Abbiamo il 3 minuti. Cioè si è proprio fermata la volatilità, ma di brutto proprio. L'X è ritornato a meno 0,82 nel frattempo, proprio il polmone totale.
Live streaming platform Fubo is on the path to major growth, and they have the revenue and subscription numbers to prove it. Michael Pachter joining us right now. He's the managing director and equity research analyst over at Wedbush Securities. He's got an outperform rating on the shares. The share's under pressure here on the day, but Michael, this is really about the long-term story here, and I guess whether Fubo is now kind of the new cable bundle.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, obviously we have choices. So a lot of people think YouTube TV has already won. What Fubo's done differently from the others is they really focus on sports. So they have the same news offering and the same kind of basic cable package of the ABC, NBC, CBS package, but they also have a lot more sports. So they're going for the sports fan. It appears to be working. And I think the best part of the story is they were, you know, they burned only about $3 million in cash in the fourth quarter. They're on the precipice
No,
of being
non
cash
ci
flow
stanno
positive.
riuscendo.
Once they get there, I think the stock actually works.
Do you think that Spulu, which is the Disney, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Fox sports unit here, that everyone's calling it, is that sort of the existential
Per
threat
4 ore del DAO.
It is, and I think that
Ma non sta affondando, si è ripoggiato praticamente su 30. Guarda qua.
in how they've approached
Si è proprio ripoggiato.
you know, these guys are all those participants are cutting their own throats on retransmission
Nasdaq
fees
sta
because
qui.
they're going to give that undecided cable subscriber an excuse to
Comprano. Quasi provano a venderlo, ma
it's $10 a month per household if that household stops subscribing. It's a really dumb idea, but you know, will they do it? Sure, they'll do it. I think Fubo's lawsuit, which is unlikely for them to win,
Niente.
I don't think they're going to prevail, but it's going to serve as an advance warning. The legal term is interim effect. They're going to scare Disney and the rest into making sure that they cross every T and dot every I and they don't collude. So I think it's really smart, you know, positioning by Fubo to say, you guys better not act out of line and we're going to be right on you in court. I expect that the sports leagues are going to continue to charge whatever they can charge, but you get a better package if you're a sports fan by subscribing to Fubo than you will if you subscribe to YouTube TV plus the new sports offering.
Is there any way, though, I mean, I understand the logic of why they would pursue a lawsuit like this, but is there any way that maybe this ends up sort of coming back to them? The idea here that they're going to get pushback, and I don't mean just from the ESPNs and the bigger boys, but even some of the other competitors that maybe not necessarily want to side with ESPN, but certainly don't want Fubo to take the crown.
Well, I think that anybody who behaves in a retaliatory manner is going to suffer a lot. I don't expect that anybody really can retaliate against them. And remember that, you know, Fubo's not suing CBS or NBC. They're suing this partnership and saying that they're colluding to kind of pull content from other providers. It's not in the best interest of consumers if we have to subscribe to Peacock to watch a playoff game. That was an interesting experiment, but it's really not good for consumers. And, you know, I think that the FTC is going to get involved in this ultimately. Fubo is going to accelerate that, of course. I just don't think that they're going to.
45 minuti.
It's going to drag out for 2 or 3 years, and
Questo va.
Disney will be on best behavior during those 2 or 3 years. They aren't going to step out of bounds and risk, you know, losing a lawsuit. So they're going to behave properly, and I think Fubo's going to thrive. I really do.
Hey, Michael, great stuff. Really appreciate it. Good to see you, Michael Pachter, over at Wedbush. So let's continue the conversation and do a deeper dive with the man himself, co-founder and CEO of Fubo, David Gandler. Hey, David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I want to start where we just left off with Michael Pachter, which is the lawsuit. Have you spoken to the Justice Department about your concerns about Spulu, for lack of a better word?
Well, you know, obviously I can't comment on
Problema qua
discussions that we're having, but as you know, we have filed a complaint.
sono le dinamiche lunghe, 4 ore è tutto ancora fortemente long qua, cioè massimo top 2,60, può proprio esagerare. Proprio esagerare.
Disney and Warner Brothers have said they won't negotiate sports rights together. So how does that actually, in your mind,
La dinamica è fortemente rialzista ancora.
Why not?
Well, I don't know
Fortemente rialzista ancora.
Think about it this way. The three of us decide to buy a piece of content. Let's say you buy it. And then we're all looking at the subscriber numbers of our joint venture, and the subscriber numbers don't move. Why would I then want to bid on this type of content or piece of content the next go around? So, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. There has been and always will be some collusion.
Cioè se il DAO non è riuscito a bucare di nuovo qua area 30, cioè ragazzi, ma
What's then the strategy here going forward, David? I don't mean specifically with this lawsuit, but the
ci si è proprio poggiato invece di bucarla. Guarda qua.
that could potentially not include some major sporting events, assuming that this deal actually goes through here. What then becomes of what you're trying to build?
Yeah, well, that's actually not the case. You know, we have contracts with these companies.
Questo va su pesante, c'è sto rischio, cioè si è poggiato troppo qua a 30, ma non è possibile.
But we're already missing content. We're missing a key component of what you would believe to be.
Qui su 5 minuti, vabbè, sta provando. Hanno comprato qua, non è riuscito a aggiornare i minimi.
Hockey and baseball playoffs. So, you know, again, customers vote with their wallets. We've done a tremendous job this quarter.
Si sta attestando 60.
Record numbers across all of our top line KPIs, revenue, advertising sales, subscribers.
Cioè si è preso praticamente una pausetta. La dinamica di base qua è assurdo, ma è ancora long. Andiamo il 2 ore. Pure su 2 ore. Si è appoggiato sui minimi del 2 ore il DAO. Questo punta 140 e oltre. Mi dà quest'idea. Non è riuscito a vendere niente. Al massimo chiude così.
Jump around from, you know, service to service. We offer an aggregated service with over 50,000 sporting events on the platform. We have a premium experience that's personalized with, you know, one bill, easily manageable, you know, and so we think that people will continue to look for an aggregated
mezz'ora.
package with as much content as they can get. And by the way, that is already evidenced in what you've seen. I mean, these companies have started with plus services that were very thin. Then they decided to go into bundling and bundle with, Verizon and other services. I think Netflix and Paramount was one of the more recent ones that I've seen. And now ultimately that hasn't worked. And so the churn levels are too high. And so now they're thinking, well, why don't we circumvent M&A and just jump right into a joint venture that, in my view, acts more like a split.
And those are allegations, not facts. We just want to remind our viewers.
Allegations is true.
Okay. So, David, the broadening out in terms of
Russell invece sembra voler tentare addirittura di invertire al ribasso. Anche S&P e Nasdaq ma sono deboli.
At what point do we just reach saturation and you're not able to benefit as much?
Yeah, well, I think on the subscriber side, you're already seeing that, right? If you combine the pay TV ecosystem with the virtual MVPD ecosystem, you get to about, call it 75, 80 million, households. And if you look at Netflix, which is, the pinnacle of all streaming,
Test dei massimi su 15 minuti per il DAO. Livello venduto da 3 ore.
Netflix is able to achieve in the United States, which is obviously the key market. From an advertising perspective, you're completely right.
Questo è il 45 minuti.
Undifferentiated. In our case, it's very different. We skew
Cioè se voleva scendere, cioè cavolo, da mo che era sceso.
Demographic, and most of our programming is sports related, and so advertisers love, buying inventory in sports programming. It drives brand recall, and there's lots of halo effects around it. So we're actually very well positioned as it relates to advertising.
What about in terms of differentiating, like
Nasdaq è ritornato dove?
I mean, ESPN is thinking about doing that. You walked away from that, but do you need that now, particularly if your demographic is just so targeted to that area? It seems like sports betting is a no-brainer.
Yeah, sports betting is a no-brainer. By the way, everything that we've ever said or developed has been copied by all of these services. Our strategy, come for the sports, stay for the entertainment, our multi-view that YouTube has recently released. And, we stepped away from betting. We were planning to do it another way when the markets started to turn against us. But, as part of the claim that we have a significant number of restrictions that, these programmers, force us to comply with, that they don't force their own services to comply with and give themselves a lot more flexibility. So this is one of the things that you mentioned that we would love to explore, because we think we can do a great job for our customers. Again, leveraging all of the data.
Poi Fabio Vertuccelli dice a questo punto entro long sul Nasdaq.
Can you continue to do that, David, longer term?
Vabbè, io ho chiuso lo short sul DAO, mi sono girato a 30 e qualcosa qua, 36.
Under normal competitive circumstances, just fair pricing. It's the
Non sto long io.
require. You would see
Qua fa una fatica allucinante, cioè troppo. Non eccede, volatilità zero, cioè boh. Poi se mi sbaglio, pazienza, ne è andata.
Or I should say, since our listing on the NYSE, has exceeded guidance 11 out of 12 quarters, improved on the bottom line by about, I think it's 4 quarters now in a row, has 17 fewer channels, a higher price, and, obviously very little margin to speak for. So, my view is once that happens and we can
Vediamo il DAO che combina.
same playing field, equal footing, this
Si
is
è
a company
proprio
that can ramp
poggiato.
up, I would say, relatively quickly.
All right,
Siamo in
David, thanks a lot.
mezz'ora.
Super appreciate your time today, Fubo.
Thank you so much.
Fubo CEO
Cioè,
and co-founder
ma che è?
David Gandler joining us. And as a reminder, we are out to Disney, Fox, and Warner Brothers.
Questo prova l'allungo, in caso lo vendono dopo che ha allungato.
Stock, though, for Fubo, it's down about 8% today, but it's down about 47% since the high that it hit in December.
Yeah, I mean, this is now about monetization and the idea that if they are stealing people or getting people, I guess, to gravitate from that sort of bifurcated system to a more aggregated system here, are they the beneficiaries, or does it sort of maybe go to, I don't know, an aggregator like a Warner Brothers Discovery, which I know they wouldn't call themselves that, but that's effectively what they've become as well.
Yeah, I can't keep track anymore of like who has what app has what sport team is where. Can you?
No, but that just means I just don't watch anything anymore. so.
You just sit, look at the wall. All right, that's fair enough.
But you know what, Alex?
Yes.
You can always
Questa è il
find
mezz'ora del
You can
Nasdaq.
always find, we have our own app. It's right there. It's amazing, and you can watch us every day. All right, let's turn now to some breaking news we had earlier in the day. Bloomberg learning that Boeing is in talks to acquire Spirit Aerosystems, a move that would reclaim control of
Dow
its
oggi fermo
aerostructures
praticamente.
unit and the main supplier at the center of quality issues affecting the
Cioè
737 MAX airliner.
dopo le 4:30 si è fermato.
Ferguson joins us now. Hey,
Fermato
George,
lì dove
game this
stava.
out for me.
Vabbè.
What happens with this over the next 6 months?
I mean, I don't think it's going to take that long, right? I would think that Boeing could strike a deal to have Spirit purchased in the next, month or so. And right now the CEO of Spirit is a gentleman by the name of Shanahan. He was a former Boeing executive. I think Boeing's already there on the line. I think they just have a lot more of a presence at Spirit Aerosystems, and they'd be in the room when it's time to
Nasdaq va a testare i minimi sul 15 minuti.
So I think that's the big change, is just having a very direct reporting line on issues about manufacturing and quality.
I get that in theory, George, but haven't they been in the room on these decisions already? Haven't a lot of the decisions, at least the ones that have impacted this company, been decisions that have been made less on the Spirit Aerosystems side and more on the Boeing side already?
Well, I mean, I think that Boeing has absolutely influenced the decisions to date, but they haven't been there to implement
Nasdaq rimane là.
implementing them on the line. And so I do think it takes on a different complexion. I think it takes on, maybe a higher sense of urgency. I think it takes on, the employees know that they ultimately answer into Boeing in a straight line, not through Spirit management. So I think it eliminates ambiguity. I do think it's a positive, but I agree with you. Boeing's already had a lot of influence in this company.
Yeah, do two wrongs make a right? Does a half a wrong and a full wrong?
S&P sta provando a fare 3 minimi discendenti su 3 minuti. 5 minuti rimane lì.
Expects the positive momentum will continue. Here in the studio with more is Ted Smith, a partner, co-founder, and president of Union Square Advisors, which has helped more than 175 deals valued in excess of 129
Vediamo se
billion.
provano a allungare, va.
We're not asking you about Spirit.
Una vera lotta tra il short e il long, all'ultimo sangue. Si vede il valore, banda di Bollinger il time frame 1 minuto, robe da super card. XM dice ha rotto la trend line sulle 2 ore. Paolo dice sei riversato long sul Dow, allora si scende. Può essere pure. Sono stato short tutto il giorno.
Is how quickly we've gravitated to the use of AI for real enterprise use cases. So things that are actually going to help the CFO, things that are going to help the general counsel, things that are going to help senior executives
Situazione tremenda.
better, make their companies more
Mamma mia.
Right. So we're seeing a lot of investment interest in that.
Cioè qua della serie cioè poteva provare tranquillamente a scendere, cioè aveva tutte le carte in regola. Eppure niente. Hanno provato a indebolirlo e niente. Adesso penso che chiunque sia short sul Nasdaq, tranne io in questo momento. Nasdaq proprio non l'ho toccato proprio oggi. Anche perché il Dow i riferimenti tecnici ce li ha e il Nasdaq non ce li ha. Il Dow i riferimenti tecnici, eccoli qua. Il Nasdaq no. Il Nasdaq, questi sono i massimi e questi uno si prende.
AI-like valuation, that remains to be seen.
The bid-ask spread, where is it? Are we reaching a happy median here? Who's the holdout?
I think right now we are. For a long time, and I would say that 2023 was characterized by the holdout on the sellers' parts. They were still stuck in 21, early 22 valuation land. Most of the buyers quickly adjusted to the 23 realities. It took a while for the sellers
il Dow forse punta 120.
And it's certainly one of the reasons we're seeing more activity.
How much of this will provide private
Vediamo se
equity
prosegue.
that they may not have had before?
Well, it's interesting because while we're certainly seeing activity on the IPO front, right? Lots of news around Reddit and others. We don't forecast a significant resurgence in the tech IPO environment. It just takes, you have to be such a large company now to become public and to want to be public. So the real private equity exits are more likely sales to strategics or sales to other private equity
Well,
firms.
that's what I'm curious about. Do we even need that pathway? I don't say need, but is that pathway to the IPO as important as it may have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago when there were fewer options for an exit?
That's exactly right. I don't think we need it as robust. And more to the point, we've ripped out a lot of the system that will allow those middle-sized companies to trade effectively.
Right.
So you're either a large public company or you're private.
I am curious, though, for those companies, the private companies that maybe see a path for investors that doesn't involve an IPO, does that change their management approach, and more importantly, how you as an investor advise them on how they manage the business?
It really doesn't, because the reality of the statistics behind it, the data show that for a venture-backed company that gets to an exit, more than 95% of the time, that's through a sale. So that's been true for many years.
Nasdaq
So it
rimane
doesn't
lì.
really change the dynamics of how you manage it. It may change the dynamics of which ones you think could get public in the current environment.
All right, Ted, great to have you here. Ted Smith over at Union Square Advisors.
Ancora là 18,3, ancora a lista.
I guess maybe, Alex, a pathway, not to an IPO, but certainly into an exit.
Yeah, I guess you just have to wonder what the regulatory backdrop is going to look like.
Yeah.
And some deals, like you make an argument, like let's announce it now, wait on the clock, and see if something different happens mid-November of this year as you get sort of a changeover maybe in the government.
Yeah.
And wait out the clock there.
Yeah, but in the meantime, we just have to get social media site Reddit.
Going.
All right, coming up here, we're going to take a look at a stock that's already in the public domain, though not necessarily doing well. New York Community Bank Corp sliding here. More of the internal issues.
5 minuti, ennesima candela positiva
Stock of the hour, right here on Bloomberg.
che rimane qua sotto, mamma mia, un'agonia. Mercati oggi pomeriggio proprio un'agonia totale. «20 minuti alla chiusura, vediamo che combinano». Jacopo dice non vuole scendere. Il problema qui, lo sai qual è pure? Che abbiamo sì Nasdaq che non vuole scendere, ma il problema è che c'è il Dow che a quanto pare non vuole fare nessuna delle due cose, cioè non vuole né salire né scendere, cioè è rimasto così, ha provato sempre a salire più o meno.
How do you see that shaking out?
So I don't think I'm right on this, but this is my instincts keep telling me this
Cioè
is
senza
gonna happen.
struttura qua in mezzo.
They launched their own network that had their own content and had their own pay-per-view.
La serie compro dei minimi a caso, capito? E esco a caso.
And then they pivoted at the perfect time and they sold their content to, what was it, Peacock?
Yeah.
And that was really smart too because they were able to leverage that number as high as possible. So they always zag where the money
S&P
was.
sembra che ci vuole provare a scendere.
I think the opportunity for the NBA with the local teams
Down
need
no.
to own all that themselves.
Down no. Nasdaq rimane sempre su quei 18,3. Questo è il 3 minuti. Russell ci prova. Neanche tantissimo. Questa è il mezz'ora. Siamo ancora sui minimi precedenti sul mezz'ora.
It's a huge week ahead in politics. On March 5th,
Niente proprio. Mercato fermo.
Then, 2 days later, as the border, the economy, and the November elections dominate the headlines, President Biden will deliver his State of the Union address. Balance of
C'è
power
15 minuti del Dow, eccolo qua.
Bloomberg's top political
Il
analysts
nulla.
live global coverage of both events starting Tuesday, March 5th. Bloomberg, context
Questo è il
changes
Nasdaq.
everything.
Cercano di tenere i minimi a 300 comunque sul Nasdaq,
All right, time now for our stock of the hour. Taking a closer look at the shares of New York Community Bank Corp. Falling today after the regional bank flagging material oversight in how it tracks loan risk. The CEO out. New leadership here as they try to grapple with the turmoil. Investors heading for the door. Abigail Doolittle joining us right now for a little bit more on this. And Abigail, we'd be remiss in not pointing out we're just a few days away from the 1-year anniversary of the SVB collapse.
Qualcosa si muove.
Last year. Here, I know this isn't quite a repeat of that, but still kind of jarring to see that the regional banking crisis still apparently had not.
Qui sul 3 minuti sembra che vogliono vendersi l'anima.
Ripple effects in some ways, even though this is fairly different in the fact that they are saying, as you mentioned, that the oversight relative to the loans that they've made.
Stiamo parlando di niente. Nasdaq rimane là 2,98, 300.
They're also saying that the loan loss provisions relative to 2023 aren't going to be increased, but relative to the future, we don't know because a big portion of it is commercial real estate. So that, of course, is under pressure with not great occupancy relative to office and then rising rates. Now, they, of course, have a big portion of their portfolio in rent-regulated apartments right here in New York City. Now, the risk to this is a lot of those loans were made when Alex got her mortgage at like 1% or 0.5%. Now it's 5%, 6%. So the cost of capital really comes into question. One other good thing is the fact that liquidity, well, it's good and bad. Last we knew liquidity was decent in February, but they clearly omitted what their deposits were now, which if it was good, you would think that they would include that. So I should actually backtrack and say we don't know about their liquidity.
Sta per chiudere il 15 minuti. Sta per chiudere il 15 minuti. Beh, tecnicamente sarebbe negativo per il Nasdaq. Negativo anche per il Dow. Il problema è che quando dovevano affondare ha pure riassorbito. Non lo so. Vi dico solo ho dovuto chiudere lo short. Mo ci manca solo che parte uno short micidiale. Per punto proprio chiudo l'internet. Sto short tutto il giorno. Questo è Nasdaq, sta per chiudere il 15 minuti, vediamo che succede. Chiusura del 5 minuti positiva, l'ennesima candela positiva per il Dow. Tutto in compressione, stiamo sempre lì dentro. Nasdaq sempre lì. Dow prova ad allungare. Mezz'ora, mamma mia, non si può vedere. Non si può vedere. Vediamo un po' se allunga a questo punto.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was a surprise. I mean, we had seen the softness there, but I think when we go back, what she was saying,
Meno 95.
last year, I think bought them some time. There are a lot of people, I think, they look at first.
91, mi chiudo un pezzo. Sto coperto.
We are talking to Michael Cugino, President Portfolio Manager over Permanent. This is Bloomberg.
Chiuso il long, preso proprio mezzo punto, non ho preso praticamente niente. Preso poco e niente. Vediamo se da qua parte uno short a questo punto. Tutti sti 5 minuti rialzisti. Vediamo un po'. Difficile però. Probabile. Non lo so. Non lo so. Nasdaq a 3,10. Questo che ancora spinge su, è tremendo, guarda.
The economy is doing very well in the Netherlands, but the election was very much focusing on migration.
They had made 26 attacks. We'd given warning after warning, but we hadn't taken action.
Parliament has to stick to this and has to comply with the debt brake. The debt brake is really a good ally.
I think we have made addressing inequality a key sort of driver of our policies.
Bloomberg.
Lo sentirà a sto livello?
The linear business is not going anywhere.
Sono rigirato short sul Dow, ma cioè veramente stop microscopico, poco sotto il massimo a 110. Vediamo che fa Nasdaq.
I don't believe prices are going down. You're going to figure out the bifurcation of the rights and give things up, not give things up.
How long do you think it is before Netflix actually jumps into sports?
You know, they're in sports right now, but they just do the shoulder programming.
Yeah.
I think their point of view, and you'll ask Ted tomorrow.
Sia mai parte uno short, almeno l'ordine l'ho inserito. L'ordine ce l'ho.
So, I'm not sure.
Vediamo un po' il settimanale. Che ci manca solo che il settimanale chiude positivo pure quello del Dow. Cioè stiamo freschi proprio. Poi 5 minuti, niente, eh. Oggi è la sagra delle candele consecutive. Qua Nasdaq ci prova. Sul 15 minuti sta ancora al test dei massimi precedenti e sta sotto tutto questo. Cioè, comprato 300 da un'ora e mezzo che compra questo livello qua. Ho provato a scendere e non c'è riuscito. Può sempre fare di peggio. Dai, scendete un attimo. Vai. Vediamo un po' se è la volta buona, va.
This is the countdown to the close. Romain Bostic alongside Alex Steele. 10 minutes until we get to those bells, Alex. And remember earlier this week you said it was a nothing burger?
Mi ricopro.
The market is, well, I don't know, a something burger? I don't know. It's not quite, I don't know if
Cioè praticamente ho fatto scalping gli ultimi minuti. Proprio letteralmente scalping ho fatto.
Doing really well, Dell's at a record, like fair enough, like they have burgers and like they definitely
that's a broadening of the rally, right?
Those are nice, good burgers. Yeah. But on the flip side, let me just point two things out. One, Apple really seems to be breaking down. We're off the lows of the session, but we're under 180, and that was that level where we might see some shorts coming on. And then check this one out: the gambling stocks. When you also have Las Vegas stands, Macau gaming revenue.
Nasdaq rimane là 18.305, ancora li tiene, è incredibile. Ancora tiene. Ha sentito 65 questo. Questo è il 45 minuti. E guardate che cavolo di compressione.
Those Macau numbers. I thought that was kind of interesting, yeah.
We do want to stay here in the U.S. as we count you down to the closing bells with 9 minutes to go. Michael Cugino joining us right now, president and portfolio manager.
Bella dinamica pure il Russell.
of funds. Mike, great to have you here on the
Bene,
program.
ottimo.
And I mean, I'm sure you've seen the market action for the first couple of months of the year, which I think defied a lot of expectations. A pretty
Ottimo.
strong market, at least here in the US, and March is kind of starting off on the
Attenzione a
same
questo
foot. Are you
livello,
buying?
39.055 sul Dow.
We're not buying it, but we are enjoying the positions that we own, and we've actually trimmed a little bit as well.
Stare
Into some of
attento qua.
the highs in some stocks, even ones we like an NVIDIA, for example. And so, I think the story for equities is strong, but they're not cheap. And if the Fed
Gli ultimi mezz'ora, guardate che roba sul Dow.
if there's a soft landing or no landing or whatever, that's also a good argument. And there's a lot of energy around technology and artificial intelligence, especially for companies that aren't disappointing. And so I think that's been the big driver this week.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, Michael, because I mean, a lot of folks out there are still looking for opportunities.
Nasdaq a 300, 8 minuti alla chiusura. 8 minuti alla chiusura. Siamo ancora messi così.
Well, I would argue that maybe they say they're looking for cheap stocks, but they're actually buying the ones that are pretty expensive.
Questo è Russell. Prova a tenere. A me mi sta stunnando completamente il Dow, ragazzi. Hanno ripreso questo. Nasdaq 306. Sul mezz'ora. Tecnicamente dovrebbe andare ad aggiornare i minimi. 2,90 Nasdaq. Il problema è che ci sono questi due minimi sul mezz'ora che reggono ancora tutto il long.
But the sort of consolidation that we've seen, I don't believe is healthy in the longer term. And we do need some diversification and some broadening. And hopefully we continue to see that.
Questo con tutto, cioè si deve riposare, capito? Questo grafico. Si deve fare una candela rossa, una sola. Sta provando a ripartire su 5 minuti il bastardo.
We would look at some of the areas, some of the industrials, energy and commodities we think are not, they have not performed.
Nasdaq 304.
Longer term, that area has a lot of potential to it, especially if global growth resumes. The dollar comes off its almost decade highs. And supply demand, constraints exist in an emerging growth situation globally. Those companies tend to also manage shareholder returns very well with special dividends, regular dividends, buybacks, etc. And so we think for patient investors with strong stomachs, that's an area that is a lot cheaper. In many cases, stocks, trading at below market multiples. Biotech,
Mamma mia, il Dow non riesce né a salire e né a scendere. Non riesce a fare nessuna delle due cose. Non riesce né a scendere né a salire questo.
So there are opportunities, but broadly speaking, we're not buying stocks right now because they're not cheap. But we are enjoying the names that we own in our asset allocation.
Are bonds cheap?
Prova a salire, giustamente. Nasdaq 309. Russell pure prova a salire. Ma porca miseria.
Specifically, as well as an equity strategy, but we also run our permanent portfolio, which is an asset allocation model. And so in that model, we're pairing up equity exposure with bond exposure. And we've been finding value in shorter duration investment grade corporates.
5 minuti alla chiusura, ragazzi. Anzi, 4 minuti e 20. Vediamo se lo buttano giù adesso. Vediamo se provano a fare un movimento adesso.
Some firms have already tried to do that. I think we've been a little bit cautious on that because we still see some volatility in interest rates, whether it's the Fed, whether it's the uncertainty of the inflation picture, which, may be having a tougher time going from 3% to 2%. And maybe the Fed's going to be higher for longer. So at some point, duration will want to be extended. We're not sure where. So we're playing it cautious, and we're finding yields that work. And staying pretty low in duration.
How much confidence do you have right now, or certainty do you have right now, Michael, in your view, about the pace of rate cuts this year? A big debate right now, not just whether the Fed will
aspettano le options expiry.
Of course, some discussions about
ma così è un'odissea, ragazzi. Cioè,
Well, it's hard to see a recession with, sub 4% unemployment and consumer spending.
Se scendono lo fanno dopo la chiusura, subito dopo.
do think some of the anecdotal
Sì,
information out there is leading to a really gradually paced move towards a slowdown, but that's not, baked in. It could change.
se scendono, perché
It's hard to see that sort
la
of
dinamica qua...
without a slowing down of the economy, whether it's aggressive or not, the Fed can afford to be patient and stay higher for longer.
Cioè, il Dow, mamma mia, sono andato a prendere peggio proprio.
From the mid threes down to 2, you can stay higher for longer and see what happens.
Del Nasdaq non mi fido, però è troppo rialzista Nasdaq, troppo proprio.
We think cuts are going to happen at some point.
Cioè, ti può fregare da un momento all'altro.
And as a result, that's been a little bit behind our, hesitancy
3 minuti.
at the moment.
Yeah.
Inflation could pick up again. Nobody's really noticed, but oil prices are going up again.
Oh, Alex noticed.
Nel frattempo vado a vedere un secondo che succede sull'azionario. Ma niente, Nvidia rimane lì, Meta pure, 502. Nvidia 8,21 e 80 praticamente. Google stanno buttando giù. Google stanno buttando giù, meno 1,20. Ma Apple tiene. Microsoft pure rimane là sulla resistenza. Nvidia prosegue col rialzo addirittura. Su 5 minuti sta provando l'allungo al rialzo. Meta. Nvidia, scusate. No, non si può vedere sto grafico.
Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Alex Steele. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with Scarlett Fu, Carol Master, Tim Stenovic. A welcome to our audiences across our Bloomberg platform.
Nasdaq rimane lì, al momento. Nasdaq rimane lì.
At record highs, gold at record highs, and Bitcoin having its best week in a year.
Yeah, I don't know what that says. Risk on trade, I guess, is kind of the net, right? Take a look at the semiconductor index, guys. It's up for a second day in a row, rallying more than 4% today. That's after a 3% gain yesterday. So we continue to see that.
5 minuti del Dow è una cosa inguardabile. È dalle 7 che fa così, anzi pure peggio. Ultimo minuto. Ultimo minuto. Andiamo al Nasdaq. L'ultimo minuto.
But if you look at yields and if you look at equities, not a lot of people are actually buying into his call that the Fed is not going to lower rates this year. But I think it does add to the chorus that there are a handful of people out there who say, okay, well, the next move from the Fed could be keeping rates where they are, or in fact making them higher.
Maybe making them higher, although some Fed officials have come out, John Williams notably saying that he thinks that the Fed will end up cutting rates. What interests me, given the slow move up, the melt up in prices, is that volume is actually higher than the 20-day average on a day like today. Typically, when you see a melt up, you see less involved participation. And interesting because Apple had a
Chiuso il
day.
mercato.
It has been pretty terrible, but small caps breaking through that December high. So if we can really go with that Apple, I think that could be quite interesting, Romain.
Well, we definitely did it.
2,90 Nasdaq.
For 1 week here, green across the screen here on this Friday afternoon as we get the closing bells here in New York.
Io ho chiuso, ragazzi. Ho chiuso. Chiuso, mi sono stufato. Mi sono stufato. Chiuso, ho fatto long short alla fine. E basta. È rimasto così, ragazzi. È rimasto così. È rimasto là. È rimasto lì. Dow è rimasto lì. Nasdaq è così, ragazzi. Cioè, 4 ore così. Si sale ancora. Si sale ancora. Il Dow è un grandissimo punto interrogativo. Grandissimo punto interrogativo. Vabbè. Staremo a vedere, ragazzi. Staremo a vedere da lunedì in poi. Ragazzi, altra serata fino a chiusura. Male qua, eh. Comunque, ragazzi, io vi ringrazio. Vado a mangiare. e vi auguro di trascorrere buona serata e ovviamente vi auguro di trascorrere una buona notte e un buon weekend. Grazie ancora veramente a tutti. A un certo punto ce l'ho fatta anche a leggere, ragazzi, non ce la faccio più. E ci vediamo lunedì, mi raccomando. Buon weekend, buona serata e per lunedì mattina buon trading.